The sun was a pale, wounded disk hanging low over the jagged teeth of the blue mountains when Geralt of Rivia first felt the change in the air. It was a subtle shift, a rhythmic cooling that whispered of old stone and rising mist. On the path, time does not move in hours, but in the slow, deliberate rhythm of a horse's stride. Roach's hooves found a steady cadence upon the packed earth, thud, tap, a sound that seemed to anchor the world to the ground. Geralt sat in the saddle with the easy, practiced stillness of a man who had spent more of his life on the move than at rest. The leather of his doublet, seasoned by salt and rain, emitted a rhythmic, soft groan with every sway of the horse. Creak, creak. It was a familiar music, a sound that spoke of home, if a witcher could ever truly claim such a thing. The sight of the hunter. As the twilight deepened, the world through Geralt's eyes transformed into a study of silver and charcoal. His pupils, those vertical slits of midnight, expanded to drink in the dying light. He watched the way the wind moved through the tall, dry rye, a rhythmic golden undulation that looked like the surface of a sea. He could see the microscopic tremor of a leaf 100 yards away, a rhythmic vibration caused by the scurrying of a beetle. To Geralt, the darkness was never empty. It was a crowded, rhythmic tapestry. He saw the warmth of the earth radiating upward in soft orange plumes, and the cold blue shimmer of the mountain runoff as it trickled over shale. The silver sword at his back caught the last of the sun, casting a rhythmic pale flash across the bark of the passing pines. It was a cold light, a sharp contrast to the warm amber glow beginning to flicker in the distant windows of a nameless hamlet. The scent of the wild. The air was heavy, carrying a narrative of its own. Geralt inhaled slowly, letting the scents settle in the back of his throat. He recognized the sharp medicinal bite of celandine and the bitter, earthy tang of wolfsbane clinging to his gloves. But beneath the herbs lay the true scent of the trail: damp moss, wood smoke, and the faint copper-like smell of old iron. As he approached a stagnant pool of water, a new rhythm entered the air, the sweet, cloying scent of decay. It was the smell of something that had drowned a long time ago and refused to stay quiet. His wolf head medallion, resting heavy against his chest, gave a sudden, rhythmic thrum. It was a subsonic vibration, a low-frequency hum that he felt in his very marrow. Magic was afoot, or perhaps just the lingering echo of a curse. He did not reach for his sword. He simply listened to the rhythm of the warning, his heart beating a slow, steady counterpoint, the calm, rhythmic pulse of a man who had stared into the abyss until the abyss blinked first. The inn at the crossroads. He reached a low-slung building of timber and thatch, its windows leaking a honey-colored light into the mist. This was the rhythmic heart of the village, the inn. He dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with a solid, rhythmic thud. He led Roach to the trough, listening to the horse lap at the water, a rhythmic, splashing sound that was the only break in the evening's hush. Inside, the air was a thick, warm soup of peat smoke and roasted grease. The floor was covered in dry rushes that crunched with a rhythmic, papery sound beneath his feet. Crush, crush. The conversation in the room did not stop, it simply changed its rhythm. The loud, boisterous laughter of the village men dipped into a low, suspicious murmur, a rhythmic tide of whispers that flowed around Geralt as he walked toward a corner table. He sat. The wood of the chair was rough and unpolished. He felt the grain beneath his fingers, a rhythmic pattern of growth and time. He ordered a mug of beer, and when it arrived, the condensation on the clay was cold and rhythmic in its slow descent toward the table. He did not look at the other patrons. He watched the fire. The hearth was the soul of the room. Massive logs of birch and oak turned to ash in a slow, rhythmic consumption. The flames were a dance of violet and gold, reflecting in Geralt's yellow eyes until they seemed to glow from within. In the rhythmic crackle of the wood, pop, snap, hiss, he found a gateway to memory. He saw the great hall of Kaer Morhen during the long white months of winter. He remembered the smell of venison fat dripping into the coals, a rhythmic hiss that signaled a feast. He remembered the way the stone walls of the keep seemed to breathe, a rhythmic sighing of wind through the high, narrow arrow slits. He could see Vesemir, the eldest of them, sitting by a fire much like this one. Vesemir's voice had been a rhythmic, gravelly rumble, a sound like stones grinding in a riverbed. "Patience, Geralt," the old man had said, the light of the fire catching the silver of his own medallion. "A witcher's greatest weapon isn't his sword, but his ability to find the rhythm of the weight." Geralt closed his eyes for a moment, let the warmth of the inn's hearth wrap around him like a heavy wool blanket. The tension in his shoulders, the rhythmic aches of the day's ride, began to dissolve into the amber glow of the room. The Striga's shadow. But the peace was a thin veil. The reason he was here, in this corner of Temeria, was the king's daughter. A creature of the curse, a Striga who lived in a rhythmic cycle of hunger and sleep within the ruins of the old palace. Geralt thought of the palace. It would be a place of rhythmic desolation, shattered marble, trailing ivy, and the cold, damp scent of a tomb. He imagined the Striga's breathing, a wet, rhythmic rasping that would echo through the empty ballrooms. He would have to go there soon. He would have to match his rhythm to hers, to find the heartbeat of the beast and guide it back to the heartbeat of a girl. He reached into his pocket and felt the smooth, cold surface of a small glass vial. It was a decoction of black hellebore and mandrake. Tomorrow, the liquid would slide down his throat with a rhythmic, bitter burn. It would rewrite the rhythm of his blood, turning him into something faster, colder, and more silent than the dark. The night's embrace. For now, he stayed in the rhythm of the inn. He listened to the rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall, a steady tock, tock, tock that marked the passing of the mundane world. He watched the shadows of the patrons dance against the timber walls, their movements rhythmic and distorted. When the innkeeper finally snuffed out the candles, the darkness returned to its velvet state. Geralt climbed the stairs, the rhythmic creaking of the wood beneath him a final song for the day. He lay down in his room, the straw mattress rustling with a soft rhythmic hiss as he settled in. Through the window, he could see the moon. It was a silver scythe, hanging over the world in a rhythmic, eternal watch. The wind outside began to rise, a low, rhythmic moan that carried the scent of the coming frost. Geralt let his breath slow, matching it to the rhythmic soughing of the trees in the distance. The path would be there in the morning. The monsters would be there in the dark. But here, in the silence of the stone and the warmth of the memory, there was only the rhythm of the rest. Sleep now. The silver is cold. The iron is steady.
The white wolf is at rest. Let the rhythmic pulse of the wilderness and the steady breathing of the night lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The journey from the village to the old palace of Wyzim was a descent into a world that time had forgotten. As Geralt rode Roach through the skeletal remains of the royal park, the air thickened with a rhythmic, heavy mist. The trees here were ancient and twisted, their silver-gray bark looking like the skin of petrified giants. The sound of the wind through the dead branches was a rhythmic, dry rattling, scritch, scritch, like the sound of parchment being torn in a library. As the ruins of the palace emerged from the fog, the rhythm of the wilderness shifted. Here, the silence was absolute, a pressurized quiet that felt like the weight of a heavy, damp cloak. The palace had once been a place of rhythmic celebration, of golden light and the melodic laughter of courtiers, but now it was a monument to rhythmic decay. The white marble of the columns was stained with damp green moss, and the grand staircases were cracked, as if the earth itself were trying to reclaim the stone. The alchemical ritual. Geralt dismounted near the great entrance. The sound of his boots on the frost-covered stone was a sharp, rhythmic clack-clack. He led Roach to a sheltered archway, patting her neck in a slow, rhythmic motion. "Stay," he whispered, his voice a low-frequency vibration in the cold air. He found a dry corner within the vestibule and began the rhythmic preparation for the night. This was a meditation of the flesh. He sat cross-legged, his spine straight against the cold granite. He pulled a leather roll from his belt, revealing vials of dark, thick liquids. The potion of cat. He pulled the glass stopper. The sound was a tiny rhythmic pop. As he drank, the liquid burned with a rhythmic metallic heat. He felt his heart rate begin to slow, settling into a deep subsonic thrumming. His pupils expanded until his golden eyes were twin voids of absolute black, ready to perceive the rhythmic heat of a living thing in the dark. The blizzard. He drank a second vial, and the world began to slow. The rhythm of the falling dust motes in the moonlight became a slow-motion dance, each speck of dust a rhythmic silver star. The silver oil. He took a cloth and began to rub the silver blade of his sword. The movement was a rhythmic, hypnotic sliding. Shit, shit. The steel began to glow with a rhythmic, pale radiance, a light that seemed to pulse with its own quiet heartbeat. The descent into the shadows. He entered the throne room. The air was ice-cold and smelled of stagnant water, old incense, and the ancient copper-like scent of dried blood. High above, the rhythmic movement of the clouds across the moon cast long, shifting shadows across the floor. He waited. This was the Witcher's true craft, the rhythm of the wait. He stood as still as the statues that lined the walls, his breathing a slow, rhythmic exhale that barely disturbed the air. He listened to the palace breathe. The sound, a rhythmic dripping of water from a cracked vault. Drip, drop, drip. The vibration, a low-frequency groan of shifting masonry, a rhythmic settling of the weight of the past. The warning. His silver medallion began to vibrate. It was a rhythmic, cold humming against his chest, a subsonic pulse that told him the rhythm of the curse was drawing near. The Striga's arrival. She did not arrive with a roar. She arrived with a rhythmic, wet, sliding sound, the sound of heavy muscle moving over cold stone. Shh-loop, shh-loop. Out of the darkness of the lower crypts, the Striga emerged. She was a masterpiece of rhythmic horror. Her body was a mass of corded muscle and tangled reddish hair, her eyes glowing with a rhythmic feral amber. She moved in a series of sudden rhythmic lunges, followed by moments of terrifying stillness. Geralt did not draw his sword. He watched the rhythm of her shoulders, the way she inhaled the scent of the room in a rhythmic predatory sniffing.
The fight began not as a brawl, but as a rhythmic dance of evasion. Geralt moved like a shadow, his movements fluid and rhythmic, always staying just outside the reach of her talons. He used the sign of Ard, a rhythmic snap of his fingers that sent a wave of pressurized air into the room. The sound was a rhythmic booming thoom, like a thunderclap caught in a stone jar. The Striga was thrown back, her claws scraping the marble with a rhythmic metallic screech. The night in the sarcophagus. Geralt knew that to break the curse, he must not kill the beast. He had to keep her away from her sanctuary, the stone sarcophagus in the crypt, until the third crow of the rooster. He led her deeper into the bowels of the palace. The crypt was a place of rhythmic, suffocating darkness. In the center sat the king's mother's tomb. Geralt used a rhythmic, powerful heave to slide the lid aside. Grinned thud. He stepped inside and pulled the lid shut over him. Imagine the silence of the tomb. It was an absolute rhythmic weight. Geralt lay in the dark, the stone cold against his back, the scent of old dust and dry lavender filling his lungs. Outside, the Striga arrived. He could hear her rhythmic, frustrated scratching on the lid. Scree-clack, scree-clack. Her growls were a rhythmic guttural vibration that he felt through the stone. He remained in a rhythmic trance, focusing on the slow, steady beat of his own heart. Thump, pause, thump. He was a man in a grave, waiting for the world to be reborn. The hours passed in a rhythmic sequence of shadows. He thought of the girl trapped inside the beast, her soul caught in a rhythmic loop of hunger and rage. He willed the rhythm of his own calm to pass through the stone, to settle the storm outside.
Finally, the rhythm of the night began to break. Through the cracks in the masonry above, a pale, rhythmic gray light filtered into the crypt. Then, from the distant village, came the sound. The rooster's crow was a sharp, rhythmic shattering of the silence. It was the sound of the mundane world reclaiming the night. Geralt waited until the third crow had faded into a rhythmic echo. He pushed the stone lid aside. The sound was a rhythmic, heavy grind scrape. He emerged, his eyes slowly adjusting to the morning light. On the floor of the crypt, the Striga was gone. In her place lay a girl, thin, pale, and shivering. Her breathing was a rhythmic, fragile sigh. The curse was broken. The rhythm of the nightmare had been overwritten by the rhythm of the dawn. Geralt approached her slowly, his movements a rhythmic, gentle reassurance. He wrapped her in his cloak, the heavy wool providing a rhythmic, warming comfort. The morning after. As Geralt carried the princess out of the ruins, the sun rose over the lake of Wyzim. The light was a deep, rhythmic gold, turning the mist into a sea of fire. He found Roach waiting under the archway, her rhythmic whinny a welcoming sound in the stillness. He felt the rhythmic throb of the wound on his neck where the beast had caught him, a sharp, rhythmic reminder of the cost of the night. But as he looked at the girl sleeping in his arms, the rhythm of the pain was balanced by the rhythm of the success. He had found the human rhythm beneath the monster's rage. He rode back toward the city. The sound of Roach's hoofs on the road was a rhythmic celebratory beat. Thud, tap, thud, tap. The world was waking up. He could hear the distant rhythmic ringing of the city bells and the rhythmic calling of the fishermen on the lake. The contract was finished. The silver oil was dry on his blade, but the path was never truly over. It was a rhythmic, endless cycle of shadows and light. Geralt of Rivia looked toward the horizon, where the mountains stood in their rhythmic, eternal watch. Sleep now. The palace is quiet. The curse is broken. The princess is safe in her bed. Let the rhythmic pulse of the morning sun and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The Valley of Flowers and the Lute's Lament. The air changed as Geralt and his unlikely companion, the poet Dandelion, crossed the border into Dol Blathanna. The sharp, metallic scent of the northern wars faded, replaced by a rhythmic, intoxicating perfume of wild lilies, honeysuckle, and ripening plums. This was the Valley of Flowers, a place where the sun seemed to linger longer, casting a rhythmic, honey-colored glow over the rolling hills and the silver ribbon of the river Adelet. As they rode, the rhythm of their journey was a study in contrasts. Roach's hooves provided a steady, grounding beat, thud, tap, while the rhythmic strumming of Dandelion's lute added a melodic, flighty counterpoint. Plink, chime, strum. Dandelion was a creature of air and words, his voice a light, rhythmic tenor that wove stories of knights and unrequited love into the rustle of the leaves. Geralt, as always, was the silence between the notes, his golden eyes scanning the rhythmic swaying of the tall grass for things that did not belong in a paradise. The Sylvan's Game. They reached a hamlet where the rhythm of life was governed by the harvest and the whims of a god living in the fields. The villagers spoke in rhythmic, hushed tones of the Sylvan, a creature with the legs of a goat and the mischievous heart of a puck. Geralt found the creature, Torque, sitting amidst a rhythmic sea of hemp and hops. The Sylvan's movement was a rhythmic, jerky twitching, his cloven hooves clicking against the stones with a sharp cack-tack. The air around him smelled of goat musk, fermented fruit, and the dry, spicy scent of herbs. "Go away, Witcher," Torque bleated, his voice a rhythmic, comical rasp. "I am busy maintaining the rhythm of the local theology." Geralt did not reach for his silver sword. He sat in the hemp, the tall stalks brushing against his leather armor with a rhythmic, papery sound. Shh, hish. He watched the Sylvan. He understood that this was not a monster of malice, but a rhythmic anomaly, a remnant of a world that was being pushed to the edges. They sat together in the rhythmic buzzing of the bees, two relics of a fading era, sharing a rhythmic, silent understanding under the heat of the afternoon sun. The Shadow of the Aen Seidi. But the rhythm of the valley held a deeper, colder current. Out of the silver-green shadows of the ancient woods, the elves appeared, the Aen Seidi. They did not move like men. They moved with a rhythmic, ethereal fluidity, as if they were part of the wind itself. Their armor was made of leather and bark, and their eyes held a rhythmic, ancient sorrow. Geralt and Dandelion were taken to the elven camp, hidden in a rhythmic fold of the mountains where the mist never truly lifted. The air here was thin and cold, smelling of pine resin, mountain water, and the faint bitter scent of starvation. Filavandril, the elven king, stood before them. His white hair was like a rhythmic falls of silk, and his voice was a rhythmic silver whisper, a sound like the first frost cracking on a lake. "You walk upon the ruins of our world, Witcher," he said. "The rhythm of your people is a rhythmic, relentless devouring. You build your cities on our graves and call it progress." Geralt looked at the elves. He saw the rhythmic trembling of their hands from hunger and the rhythmic, fierce pride in their eyes. He felt a rhythmic, deep ache in his own chest. He, too, was a creature whose rhythm was being overwritten by a world that had no room for the old magic. He spoke not of war, but of survival, the rhythmic, inevitable necessity of adaptation. The Queen of the Fields. The tension in the camp was a rhythmic, pressurized weight until the appearance of Donna Mabe, the Queen of the Fields. She did not speak. Her presence was a rhythmic, overwhelming symphony of life. Imagine the scent that accompanied her, the smell of freshly mown hay, rain on warm earth, and the sweet, heavy aroma of 1,000 blooming roses. The air around her vibrated with a rhythmic, golden energy. Even the mountain mist seemed to retreat in a rhythmic, respectful arc. The elves knelt. The rhythm of their anger was replaced by a rhythmic, profound silence.
The queen looked at Geralt, her emerald eyes reflecting the rhythm of the entire world, the growth, the decay, and the eternal return. In that look, Geralt felt a rhythmic healing calm. The destiny of the valley was not of blood, but of a rhythmic, slow-motion transition. The elves would retreat further into the blue shadows of the mountains, and the flowers of Dol Blathana would continue to bloom in a rhythmic, indifferent cycle. The lute and the fire. That evening, Geralt and Dandelion sat by a campfire on the outskirts of the valley. The logs were applewood, burning with a rhythmic, sweet-smelling flame. The sky was a vast, rhythmic indigo, the stars so bright they looked like rhythmic pulses of white fire. Dandelion took his lute. He did not sing of kings or battles. He played a slow, rhythmic melody that captured the silence of the elves and the scent of the flowers. The notes drifted into the night air, a rhythmic silver bridge between the witcher's stoicism and the poet's heart. Geralt leaned back against a moss-covered rock. The stone was cool and rhythmic in its ancient stability. He listened to the rhythmic gurgle of a nearby brook, sh-lip, and the rhythmic distant cawing of a nighthawk. For a moment, the weight of the path felt lighter. He was not a slayer of monsters tonight. He was a rhythmic part of the valley's breath.
The road ahead. As the fire died down to a rhythmic, pulsing amber, Geralt looked toward the north. The rhythm of his life would soon take him toward Sintra, toward the law of surprise, and toward a child whose rhythm would eventually shake the foundations of the continent. But for now, there was only the rhythm of the rest. He watched Dandelion fall into a rhythmic, peaceful sleep, the lute resting against his chest like a wooden heart. Geralt closed his own eyes, letting his breathing synchronize with the rhythmic rustle of the hemp fields. The scent of lilac and gooseberries had not yet entered his life, but the rhythm of destiny was already drawing its circle. The white wolf was at peace, tucked into a rhythmic fold of the world, where the flowers whispered secrets to the moon. Sleep now. The elves are in the mist. The sylvan is in the hemp. The valley is a rhythmic floral cradle. Let the rhythmic strumming of the lute and the steady breathing of the wilderness lead you into a deep, restorative sleep. The ginn's howl and the scent of lilac and gooseberries. The town of Rind sat under a sky that felt uncomfortably tight. A canopy of gray silk stretched thin over timber-framed houses and muddy streets. The air was thick with the rhythmic pre-storm pressure that makes the skin tingle and the hair on the back of the neck rise. It was here that Dandelion, in his rhythmic, tireless search for treasure, had unsealed a vessel that should have remained at the bottom of a river for eternity. When Geralt found his friend, the air in the room was swirling with a rhythmic, invisible agitation. Dandelion's throat was swollen, his rhythmic, poetic voice reduced to a dry, terrifying silence. The air smelled of ozone, burnt sulfur, and the metallic tang of magic that had been torn open. Geralt felt the vibration in his wolf head medallion, a rhythmic, violent thrumming that was no longer a warning, but a physical assault. The House of the Sorceress. To save the poet, Geralt sought the only power in Rind capable of mending a throat scorched by a djinn, a sorceress. He found her in a house that seemed to breathe with its own rhythmic, magical pulse. Entering the chambers of Yennefer of Vengenberg was like stepping into a rhythmic, velvet storm. The room was bathed in a dim violet light that flickered in a rhythmic cadence against the tapestries.
The air was dominated by a scent that would, from that moment on, become the rhythmic anchor of Geralt's soul: lilac and gooseberries. It was a sharp, rhythmic fragrance, sweet yet acidic, floral yet cold. It was the scent of a winter garden waking up in the middle of a fever. Yennefer sat at her vanity, her movements a rhythmic, imperious grace. Her hair was a rhythmic waterfall of raven-black curls, and her eyes were obsidian mirrors reflecting a rhythmic, untamed power. "You bring me a broken poet, Witcher." Her voice was a rhythmic, melodic contralto that seemed to vibrate in the very floorboards. "But the rhythm of his injury is the least of the disruptions in this town." The rhythms of enchantment. As Yennefer prepared to harness the djinn, Geralt watched the rhythmic choreography of her magic. She did not use wands or staffs, she used her hands, drawing rhythmic, intricate glyphs in the air that glowed with a rhythmic, pulsating purple light. The sound of her magic was like the rhythmic tearing of heavy silk. Shrip, shrip. Geralt felt a rhythmic, strange pull toward her, a magnetism that was partly magical and partly the rhythmic, ancient recognition of one predator for another. He watched the rhythmic rise and fall of her shoulders as she gathered the energy of the ley lines. The house began to groan, a rhythmic, deep protest of wood and stone. The windows rattled in their frames, tuck, 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 as the djinn, trapped and furious, beat against the magical barriers she had erected. The storm overrinned. The final confrontation took place as the storm outside finally broke. The rhythm of the rain was a torrential, rhythmic drumming on the rooftops, but it was drowned out by the rhythmic, subsonic roaring of the djinn. The air and the wind became a rhythmic chaos of wind and debris. Roof tiles flew through the air like rhythmic, jagged birds, and the very foundations of the buildings shivered in a rhythmic terror. Yennefer stood in the center of the vortex, her robes billowing in a rhythmic, wild dance. She was a pillar of defiance against the elemental rage. But the djinn was a force beyond even her rhythm. It sought to consume her, its voice a rhythmic, ear-splitting howl that sounded like 1,000 lions screaming in a tunnel. Geralt knew that the rhythm of the wish was the only key. He held the final seal. He looked at Yennefer, whose rhythmic strength was beginning to falter, her face pale under the violet strobe of the magic. He did not wish for gold, nor for the death of his enemies. He looked into the rhythm of the storm and made a wish that bound his rhythm to hers, an eternal rhythmic knot that even a djinn could not untie. The silence after the wish. The transition was instantaneous. The rhythmic roaring of the djinn vanished, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The wind died down to a rhythmic, gentle sigh. The only sound was the soft patter of the receding rain and the heavy breathing of two people exhausted by the struggle. The house was a ruin of splinters and shattered glass. Geralt and Yennefer lay amid the debris. The air still smelled of lilac and gooseberries, but now it was tempered by the clean scent of rain-washed dust. Yennefer looked at him, her rhythmic black eyes searching his. The rhythm of her anger had been replaced by a quiet wonder. "You shouldn't have done that, Geralt," she whispered, her voice a rhythmic, soft vibration. "The rhythm of your life was your own. Now it belongs to the storm." Geralt did not answer. He listened to the rhythmic, steady beat of his own heart, and for the first time he felt it synchronize with the rhythm of hers.
The dawn in the ruined room. They stayed in the ruins as the sun began to rise over Rinde. The light was a rhythmic, pale gold, filtering through the shattered roof and illuminating the dust motes that drifted in a rhythmic, slow-motion dance. The town below began to wake. The sound of the rhythmic, distant ringing of the temple bells and the rhythmic calls of the townspeople assessing the damage provided a grounding, mundane counterpoint to the night's magic. Geralt watched the rhythmic movement of the sunlight across Yennefer's face. The lilac and gooseberries were still there, a rhythmic floral promise in the cool morning air. He knew that the path would be different now. The rhythm of the lone witcher was gone, replaced by a rhythmic, complex duet that would span decades and kingdoms. He felt a rhythmic, deep peace, a sense that the chaos of the djinn had finally led him to a rhythmic center. The road out of Rinde. A few days later, Geralt and Dandelion prepared to leave. Dandelion's voice had returned, a rhythmic, joyous tenor that was already composing a ballad about the storm of Rinde. Geralt adjusted the saddle on Roach, the leather creaking with a rhythmic, familiar sound. He looked back at the house. Yennefer stood on the balcony, her black robes a rhythmic silhouette against the sky. She did not wave, but the rhythm of her presence was like a physical touch. Geralt turned his horse toward the road. The rhythm of the hooves, thud tap, began again. The path stretched out before him, a rhythmic winding ribbon of gray and green. The air was fresh and smelled of wet earth and wild clover. But in his mind, the scent of lilac and gooseberries remained, a rhythmic, eternal companion in the silence of the wilderness. Sleep now. The storm is over. The djinn is gone. The scent of the flowers is drifting through the window on a rhythmic, gentle breeze. Let the rhythmic pulse of the morning sun and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The journey to Sintra was a transition from the soft, floral cradles of the interior to a world defined by the rhythmic, relentless pulse of the great sea. As Geralt rode Roach along the coastal cliffs, the air turned sharp and crystalline, carrying the rhythmic, briny scent of salt spray and the cold, oceanic depths. The sound of the waves crashing against the jagged rocks below was a massive, subsonic thrumming. Roar, shh, roar. A rhythmic percussion that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of his bones. Sintra itself was a fortress of rhythmic, martial pride. The city was built of gray granite that had been bleached white by the salt and the sun, its towers rising like rhythmic, stone fingers reaching for the clouds. As Geralt entered the citadel, the rhythm of the wilderness was replaced by the rhythmic, echoing clatter of iron-shod hooves on cobblestones and the rhythmic, sharp snapping of the blue and gold banners in the sea breeze. The banquet of the lioness. Geralt had been summoned to the court of Queen Calunt, the lioness of Sintra. The great hall was a masterpiece of rhythmic, heavy grandeur. The walls were hung with ancient tapestries depicting the rhythmic, bloody history of the lineage, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted venison, pine smoke, and the heavy, floral perfume of the court ladies. The banquet was a rhythmic symphony of excess. Imagine the sounds, the rhythmic clink-clink of silver goblets, the rhythmic low-frequency murmur of 100 noble voices, and the melodic, rhythmic strumming of harps in the gallery. Geralt sat at the high table, a rhythmic, silent shadow amidst the gold and the silk. He watched Queen Calunt. She was a woman of rhythmic, commanding power, her eyes as green and dangerous as the sea, her movement a rhythmic, predatory grace. "You are here, Witcher," the queen said, her voice a rhythmic velvet rasp that carried across the table, "because the rhythm of this night requires a sword that does not falter when the masks fall." The arrival of the urchin. The rhythm of the feast was shattered by the arrival of a knight who would not remove his helm. He called himself Duny, the urchin of Erlenwald. As he stepped into the light, the rhythmic silence that fell over the hall was absolute. Duny was cursed, his face a rhythmic, bristling mask of a hedgehog, his eyes reflecting a rhythmic, tragic nobility. He had come to claim the hand of Princess Pavetta, Kalant's daughter, by the law of surprise. The air in the hall became pressurized, a rhythmic tension that made the flames of the torches flicker and dance. Geralt felt the vibration in his wolf head medallion, a rhythmic, steady humming. This was not the chaotic magic of a djinn, but the rhythmic, ancient weight of a destiny being invoked. The storm of the source. When Kalant attempted to break the law, the hall erupted. Pavetta, a girl of quiet beauty, possessed a power she could not yet control. She was a source. The air in the hall suddenly turned cold and smelled of ozone. The sound was a rhythmic, terrifying roaring, a psychic scream that sent the tables flying and the tapestries billowing in a rhythmic, invisible wind. Geralt moved with a rhythmic, reflexive speed. He used the sign of Quen, drawing a rhythmic, shimmering shield of amber light around himself. The world became a rhythmic chaos of shattered glass and flying debris. In the center of the vortex, Pavetta stood, her hair a rhythmic silver cloud, her power a rhythmic, unbridled force of nature. Geralt recognized the rhythm. It was the elder blood, a rhythmic, ancient song that had been dormant for generations. He worked with the druid Mousesack, their movements a rhythmic, synchronized effort to ground the energy. They wove a rhythmic, dampening spell into the air, a rhythmic hum that slowly settled the storm. The law of surprise. In the silence that followed, the curse on Duny was broken. The rhythmic, wet sigh of his transformation back into a man was a profound relief. The sun began to rise over the sea, its rhythmic pale light filtering through the high windows and illuminating the ruins of the banquet. Geralt stood before Duny and Pavetta. The rhythm of the debt was now his to collect. Duny looked at him, his eyes filled with a rhythmic, deep gratitude. "What do you ask of me, Witcher?" Geralt looked at the sea, at the rhythmic, eternal horizon. He spoke the words that would haunt his path for the rest of his days. "Give me that which you already have, but do not know." The words were a rhythmic seal. A few moments later it was revealed. Pavetta was with child. The rhythm of Ciri's life had been bound to Geralt's before she had ever drawn her first breath. The echo of the sea. Geralt left Sintra as the tide was going out. The sound of Roach's hooves on the damp sand was a rhythmic, muffled thud. Thump, thump, thump. The air was fresh and carried the rhythmic, sweet scent of the morning sea. He looked back at the white towers of the city. He felt a rhythmic, strange weight in his chest. Not the weight of a contract, but the rhythmic, invisible thread of a child he had never met. He knew that the path would lead him back here. The rhythm of destiny was a rhythmic, closing circle. He rowed toward the north, the rhythmic silver glint of the waves, a constant companion in his peripheral vision. The silence of the trail. Days later, the rhythmic coastal air was replaced by the rhythmic earthy scent of the deep forests. Geralt camped by a small fire. The wood was cedar, burning with a rhythmic, aromatic crackle. He sat with his silver sword across his knees, the rhythmic movement of the sharpening stone against the steel, a hypnotic meditation. Shh, it. Shh, it. He thought of the lioness of Sintra and the girl with the silver hair. The rhythm of his life as a solitary hunter felt like a rhythmic, fading dream. He was part of something larger now, a rhythmic, ancient tapestry that was beginning to pull tight. Sleep now. The sea is calm. The hall is quiet. The law is written in the stars. Let the rhythmic pulse of the tides and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The transition into the forest of Brokilon was a rhythmic surrender to the green. As Geralt left the sun-drenched meadows behind, the world dissolved into a rhythmic, infinite canopy of oak, ash, and rowan. Here the air was heavy, humid, and smelled of damp ferns, ancient moss, and the sweet, resinous scent of tree sap. It was a rhythmic, vertical world, where the sky was merely a series of rhythmic, emerald-green flickers high above the towering trunks. In Brokilon, the silence was not an absence of sound, but a rhythmic, living symphony. It was the rhythmic rustle of leaves in a wind that never reached the forest floor, and the rhythmic, distant gurgle of the Ribbon River, a sound like liquid silk moving over velvet stones. Geralt moved with a rhythmic, heightened caution. He knew that in this green twilight, the rhythm of a heartbeat could be silenced by a rhythmic, feathered shaft before a man even felt the sting. The Dryads of the Deep. Out of the moss-covered shadows, the Dryads appeared. They did not move like humans. They moved with a rhythmic, arboreal grace, their skin the color of olive wood, and their hair like braided vines. Their voices were a rhythmic, musical birdsong, a language of trills and sibilant whispers that seemed to vibrate in the humid air. Geralt raised his hands, his movement a rhythmic, slow motion. He was known to the Lady of Brokilon, Ethne. The Dryads lowered their bows, the rhythmic snap of the strings a sharp, echoing punctuation in the quiet. They led him deeper into the heart of the forest, toward the place of the silver springs. The air here became cooler, smelling of mountain water and crushed mint. The finding of the child. In a rhythmic, sun-dappled clearing where the light filtered through the leaves like rhythmic liquid gold, Geralt found her. She was a small, rhythmic presence amongst the massive roots of an ancient oak. Her hair was the color of autumn hay, and her eyes were large, emerald-green mirrors of the forest itself. This was Ciri, the princess of Sintra, the child of surprise. She was sitting by a stream, her rhythmic small hands occupied with building a miniature dam of pebbles and twigs. The sound of her play was a rhythmic, gentle clinking, tink, tap, tink. When she saw Geralt, the rhythm of her movements froze. A rhythmic, ancient recognition passed between them, a connection that was not made of blood, but of the rhythmic, inescapable thread of destiny. "I knew you would come," she whispered, her voice a rhythmic, fragile melody that seemed to catch in the heavy air. "The rhythm of my dreams always sounded like your horse's hooves." The water of Brokilon. To stay in the forest, one must drink the water of Brokilon, a rhythmic, magical elixir that erases the memories of the world outside. Ethne, the Lady of the Wood, stood before them. Her figure was a rhythmic, ancient marble, her eyes holding the cold wisdom of 1,000 winters. She offered the silver chalice to Ciri. The air in the clearing became pressurized, a rhythmic tension that made the leaves stop their swaying. Geralt watched the rhythmic rise and fall of Ciri's chest. He felt the vibration in his medallion, a rhythmic, deep humming that resonated with the girl's latent power. Ciri drank. The sound was a rhythmic, soft swallowing,
But as the magic took hold, the rhythm did not erase her past. Instead, it synchronized with the rhythm of her destiny. She did not forget Sintra, she remembered the Witcher. The water of Brokilon, which had rewritten the rhythms of countless humans, found in Ciri a rhythm that was too strong to be altered. The night under the canopy. That night, they slept beneath the roots of the great oak. The air was cool and carried the rhythmic sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. Ciri curled into the rhythmic protective weight of Geralt's cloak. Her breathing was a steady, rhythmic sigh, in, out, that matched the rhythmic soughing of the branches far above. Geralt stayed awake, his golden eyes watching the rhythmic movement of the fireflies in the dark. He thought of the lioness of Sintra and the tragic fall of the kingdoms of men. He realized that the child in his arms was a rhythmic, singular bridge, a source of power that would either mend the rhythm of the world or shatter it. The silence of the forest was a rhythmic, maternal embrace. For the first time, Geralt felt the rhythm of the path being replaced by the rhythm of the father. He was no longer a hunter of monsters. He was a rhythmic sanctuary for a girl who carried the weight of the elder blood. As the morning light touched the tops of the trees in a rhythmic silver sequence, they prepared to leave. Ethne watched them from the shadows. Her voice was a rhythmic rustling wind. The rhythm of the forest will always remember her, White Wolf, but the rhythm of the world outside is a rhythmic, hungry fire. They rode out of Brokilon on Roach. The transition back to the meadows was a rhythmic, bright explosion of sunlight and air. Ciri sat in front of Geralt, her rhythmic small hands holding on to the saddle horn. The sound of the hooves, thud tap, was a rhythmic, celebratory beat that carried them away from the emerald twilight. Geralt looked at the horizon. His life had been a rhythmic, solitary line. Now it was a rhythmic, complex circle. He felt a deep peace, a sense that the child of surprise was not a burden, but an essential center. The silence of the road. The road toward the north was a rhythmic, winding ribbon. The air was fresh and smelled of wild clover and the coming rain. Geralt watched the rhythmic movement of Ciri's hair in the breeze. He knew that the trials were coming, the rhythmic cold winters of Kaer Morhen and the bitter lessons of the Witcher's life. But for now, there was only the rhythm of the journey. He listened to the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion and the steady beat of his heart. The White Wolf and the lion cub of Sintra were moving together, their rhythms intertwined in the vast, ancient silence of the continent. Sleep now. The forest is deep, the water is cool, the child is safe in the Witcher's arms. Let the rhythmic pulse of the leaves and the steady breathing of the wilderness lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The peace of the forest was a fragile rhythm, soon shattered by the heavy, rhythmic thundering of the southern drums. The Nilfgaardian Empire, a rhythmic, iron-clad machine of conquest, crossed the Yaruga River. The air of the continent changed. It no longer smelled of wild clover and pine, but of rhythmic, churning smoke and the cold, acrid scent of charred timber. The fall of Sintra was a rhythmic catastrophe. Imagine the sound of the city's end. It was not a single crash, but a rhythmic, escalating roar. The rhythmic thud of stone-hurling engines against the white walls. Thum, thum, thum. The rhythmic, terrifying screaming of the wind as the city burned, a sound that harmonized with the rhythmic, metallic clatter of the Black Infantry's march. Queen Calonte, the lioness, met her end in a rhythmic, tragic finality, jumping from the highest tower into the rhythmic, eternal embrace of the sea. The massacre and the mist. Ciri fled into the rhythmic, chaotic dark. For the child of destiny, the world became a series of rhythmic, terrifying snapshots. The rhythmic flashing of fire against the black armor of the Nilfgaardian knight with the winged helm, the rhythmic, frantic sobbing of the refugees, and the rhythmic smell of horse sweat and blood. She vanished into the rhythmic, gray mists of the Trans-Yaruga woods. The air there was cold and smelled of damp earth and the heavy, stagnant scent of old leaves. The silence of the woods was a rhythmic, suffocating weight, broken only by the rhythmic cawing of crows settling on the ruins of the world. Ciri moved like a rhythmic, small shadow, her rhythm a rhythmic, desperate survival in a landscape that had forgotten the meaning of home. The Hill of the 14. While the child wandered, the mages of the north gathered at Sodden Hill to meet the rhythmic tide of the south. The battle was a rhythmic, magical apocalypse. Imagine the sound of the magic at Sodden. It was a rhythmic, ear-splitting cracking of the atmosphere, the rhythmic crack hiss of fireballs, and the rhythmic, subsonic humming of protective shields being shattered like glass. The air was pressurized, a rhythmic, roaring furnace of energy that turned the hill into a rhythmic, blackened tomb. Triss Merigold stood on the hill, her rhythm a rhythmic, terrified bravery. The air smelled of ozone and burnt hair. She felt the rhythmic, cold bite of the fire magic as it tore through the lines. When the battle ended, the rhythm of the hill was a rhythmic, absolute silence. 14 names were carved onto the stone, a rhythmic, solemn list of the fallen. The air was still, carrying only the rhythmic, drifting scent of ash and the rhythmic, mournful sighing of the wind through the scorched grass. Deralt searched in the aftermath of Sodden. The rhythm of his journey was a rhythmic, heavy sorrow. He found himself at the monument, the stone cool and rhythmic in the evening light. He touched the carved names, his rhythm a rhythmic, silent questioning. Yennefer, Triss. The silence of the hill was a rhythmic, pressurized weight. He felt the vibration in his medallion, not the rhythmic humming of a monster, but the rhythmic, lingering echo of a world that had been torn apart. The air smelled of rain-washed soot and the rhythmic, sweet scent of the first flowers pushing through the blackened earth, a rhythmic, indifferent renewal of nature. He did not find Ciri at the hill. He found only the rhythmic, hollow ache of a destiny that seemed to have slipped through his fingers. He rode away, the rhythmic thud-tap of roaches' hooves, a rhythmic, lonely sound in the vast, gray landscape of the north. The Merchant and the Bridge. The rhythm of chance led him to a bridge where a merchant named Jurga was trapped by the rhythmic, scuttling horrors of the war-torn countryside. Geralt fought the monsters, creatures of rhythmic, clicking limbs and rhythmic, wet snarling. The fight was a rhythmic, silver blur in the moonlight, ending with a rhythmic, sharp pain in Geralt's leg that sent him into a rhythmic, feverish trance. As Jurga carried him on a cart, the rhythm of the world became a rhythmic, hazy dream. Geralt drifted in and out of consciousness. He saw the rhythmic, violet eyes of Yennefer in the mist. He heard the rhythmic, melodious laughter of Ciri in the Brokelin clearing. The rhythmic creaking of the cart, creak, creak, became the rhythmic heartbeat of his recovery. The reunion at the farm. As the autumn sun was setting in a rhythmic orange glow, the air smelled of wood smoke, ripening apples, and the rhythmic, clean scent of a hearth. Jurga's wife Zola emerged from the house. Her voice was a rhythmic, warm reassurance. And then, out of the rhythmic, golden shadows of the barn, a small figure appeared. Ciri.
She ran towards him, her rhythmic small feet pounding the earth in a rhythmic, frantic joy. Geralt limped towards her, his rhythm a rhythmic, overwhelming relief. They met in the center of the field, the rhythmic, tall grass brushing against them like a rhythmic, green embrace. "You're my destiny," she whispered, her voice a rhythmic, sobbing melody against his chest. "You're more than that, Ciri," Geralt replied, his voice a rhythmic, grounding baritone. "You're the rhythm of the future." As the first rhythmic frosts of winter began to touch the fields, Geralt and Ciri prepared to leave. They would go to the only place that could offer a rhythmic stone sanctuary, Kaer Morhen. The journey north was a rhythmic, quiet meditation. The air turned sharp and crystalline, carrying the rhythmic, cold scent of the high peaks. Geralt watched the rhythmic, steady breathing of Ciri as she slept by the campfire. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion, which had settled into a rhythmic, peaceful hum. The shadow of the war was behind them, but the rhythm of the training was ahead. The white wolf and the lion cub were moving towards the stone, towards the brothers, and towards the rhythmic, bitter secrets of the Witcher's life. Sleep now. The hill is quiet. The fire is out. The child is found. Let the rhythmic pulse of the stars and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The ascent to Kaer Morhen was a rhythmic surrender to the cold. As Geralt and Ciri climbed the winding, treacherous path known as the Snail, the air transformed. It lost the heavy, humid scent of the lowlands, becoming a rhythmic, crystalline purity that tasted of ancient ice and granite dust. The sound of the wind through the jagged peaks was a rhythmic, hollow moaning, a sound of the earth breathing through its stone teeth. The fortress itself emerged from the mist like a rhythmic, skeletal giant. Kaer Morhen was a place of rhythmic, ruined majesty. Its walls were scarred by the rhythmic memory of ancient sieges, and its towers reached for the stars in a rhythmic, defiant silence. As they crossed the drawbridge, the rhythmic metallic clatter of roaches' hooves echoed off the mountain walls, a rhythmic signal that the white wolf had returned to the stone. The Brothers of the Wolf. Inside the keep, the air was a rhythmic tapestry of familiar scents: wood smoke, old leather, the metallic tang of sharpening stones, and the sharp, bitter aroma of the herbs used in the Witcher's tonics. The shadows were deep and rhythmic, flickering in the light of the massive hearth in the great hall. There, the rhythmic, gravelly voices of the brothers met them. Vesemir, the eldest, moved with a rhythmic, slow-motion grace, his eyes holding the rhythmic, weary wisdom of centuries. Eskel, with his rhythmic, scarred face and steady pulse. Lambert, whose rhythm was a rhythmic, sharp-edged restlessness. They looked at Ciri, the small, rhythmic presence in their world of gray stone and silver swords. "She is the one," Vesemir said, his voice a rhythmic, subsonic rumble that seemed to settle the very dust of the hall. "The rhythm of the path has brought her home." The rhythms of the training. The winter at Kaer Morhen became a rhythmic cycle of discipline and growth. For Ciri, the rhythm of the princess was replaced by the rhythmic, demanding cadence of the Witcher's training. Imagine the sound of the courtyard in the morning. It was the rhythmic thud-thud of Ciri's feet as she ran the windmill, the spinning rhythmic beams designed to hone her balance. The air was ice-cold, her rhythmic breathing forming small silver clouds in the light of the rising sun. Geralt stood by, his voice a rhythmic grounding anchor. "Find the rhythm, Ciri. Do not fight the beams. Become part of their motion." Then came the rhythm of the wooden sword. Clack, tap, clack. The The sound of wood hitting wood was a rhythmic, percussive music. Ciri moved in a rhythmic, fluid dance of parries and lunges, her rhythm a rhythmic, fast-paced echo of Geralt's own movements. The air smelled of sweat, pine needles, and the cold, dry scent of the mountain winter. The meditation and the dream. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in the great hall. The logs were thick pine, burning with a rhythmic snapping heat. Pop, crackle, glow. Geralt taught Ciri the rhythm of the meditation, the rhythmic internal stillness that allowed a witcher to hear the heartbeat of the world. "Close your eyes, Ciri," he whispered, his voice a rhythmic, calming vibration. "Listen to the rhythm of the keep, the rhythmic settling of the stone, the rhythmic sighing of the wind in the rafters, the rhythmic pulse of your own blood." But Ciri's rhythm was not like theirs. In her sleep, the rhythm of her power would surge, a rhythmic, terrifying vibration that made the glass rattle in the frames. She spoke in her dreams, her voice a rhythmic, ancient language that smelled of ozone and forgotten stars. Geralt watched her, his rhythm a rhythmic, protective concern. He knew that the stone of Kaer Morhen could house her, but it could not contain the rhythmic, wild storm of the source. The arrival of the sorceress. As the rhythmic, heavy snows of midwinter buried the keep, a new rhythm approached, Triss Marigold. Her arrival was a rhythmic, warm fragrance, the scent of roses and summer meadows amidst the ice. She brought a rhythmic, maternal softness to the keep. She tended to Ciri's rhythmic growing pains and her rhythmic frightening dreams. She spoke to the witchers in the rhythmic, flickering light of the library, her voice a rhythmic, urgent melody. "She is not a witcher, Geralt," Triss said, her rhythm a sharp clarity. "The rhythm of your potions would destroy her. She is a source. The rhythm of her magic is a rhythmic, living thread that connects her to the elder blood. You must find a different rhythm for her survival." The silence of the library. During the long nights, Geralt and Triss studied the ancient rhythmic texts, the yellowed vellum pages of books that smelled of vanilla and old ink. They looked for the rhythm of the prophecy, the rhythmic, inescapable thread of the white frost and the child of the elder blood. The library was a place of rhythmic, scholarly quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic scratching of a quill and the soft rustle of pages being turned. Fripp, fripp, fripp. Outside, the rhythmic, hollowing wind of the mountains reminded them of the rhythmic, cold world that was waiting for the girl to emerge. The departure from the stone. As the rhythmic, pale light of the spring thaw began to touch the peaks, they knew it was time. The rhythm of the training was complete, but the rhythm of the education was just beginning. They would take Ciri south to the Temple of Melite, where she could learn to bridge the rhythm of the blade and the rhythm of the spell. Geralt looked at the courtyard one last time. The rhythmic, worn stones of Kaer Morhen held the rhythmic, silent memory of his own youth, and now the rhythmic, bright energy of Ciri's. He felt a rhythmic, deep peace, the peace of a man who had fulfilled a rhythmic, ancient promise. They rode out over the drawbridge. The rhythmic thud of the hooves was a rhythmic, forward-looking beat. The white wolf, the sorceress, and the child of surprise were moving into the rhythmic, waking world. Sleep now. The keep is safe. The fire is warm. The training is done. Let the rhythmic pulse of the mountain stars and the steady breathing of the stone lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The Gardens of Elander and the Sorceress's Hand. The transition from the jagged, rhythmic heights of Kaer Morhen to the rolling plains of Elander was a slow, rhythmic thawing of the soul. As Geralt,
Ciri and Triss rode south. The air began to lose its crystalline metallic bite, replaced by a rhythmic velvet warmth that smelled of damp earth and early spring clover. The sound of the mountain wind, that rhythmic hollow moaning, gave way to the rhythmic melodic trill of songbirds returning to the eaves. The temple of Meletali appeared on the horizon as a cluster of rhythmic white stone buildings nestled within a sea of green. It was a place where the rhythm of the world was governed not by the blade, but by the slow, rhythmic cycles of growth, healing, and prayer. As they passed through the gates, the rhythmic, metallic clatter of the road was swallowed by the rhythmic, soft crunch of gravel and the rhythmic humming of bees in the temple gardens. The sanctuary of Neneki. Inside the temple, the atmosphere was a rhythmic, sacred domesticity. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of beeswax candles, dried lavender, and the sharp, clean scent of medicinal herbs, peppermint, sage, and valerian. It was a rhythmic, peaceful weight. Mother Neneki, the high priestess, met them in the central courtyard. She was a woman of rhythmic, earthy power, her voice a deep, rhythmic alto that seemed to resonate in the very stones of the floor. She looked at Geralt with the weary affection of a lifelong friend, and at Ciri with the discerning gaze of a healer. "The girl has the rhythm of a storm in her blood, Geralt," Neneki said, her voice a rhythmic, grounding vibration. "The stone of your fortress has made her strong, but the rhythm of this garden must make her whole." The rhythms of the temple life. For Ciri, the rhythm of the winter training was replaced by the rhythmic, nurturing cadence of the temple. The gardens, she spent her mornings in the rhythmic act of weeding and planting. The sound of the trowel in the cool, dark earth was a rhythmic, muffled thud scrape. The air smelled of rain-washed soil and crushed herbs. The study. In the rhythmic, quiet library of the temple, she learned the ancient names of healing plants and the rhythmic, slow-motion history of the north. The only sound was the rhythmic turning of parchment, frip, frip, and the rhythmic, distant chanting of the priestesses in the chapel. The reflection. At night, she sat by the rhythmic pulse of a single candle. Mother Neneki taught her the rhythm of the healing touch, how to find the hidden flow of life within a wound. Geralt watched her from the shadows of the cloisters. His rhythm was a silent observation. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion settling into a peaceful hum, but he knew the rhythm of the temple was only a temporary sanctuary. The rhythm of the world outside was still a rhythmic, hungry fire. The arrival of Yennefer of Vingenberg. The rhythm of the temple was forever altered by the rhythmic, imperious arrival of Yennefer of Vingenberg. She did not enter, she manifested. The air suddenly turned sharp and cold, smelling of her rhythmic, signature scent, lilac and gooseberries. The meeting between the witcher and the sorceress was a rhythmic, high-tension silence. Their rhythms, bound by the djinn's wish, synchronized in a rhythmic, ancient recognition. Yennefer's movement was a rhythmic, obsidian grace, her eyes reflecting the rhythmic, untamed power of the chaos she commanded. She had come to teach Ciri the rhythm of the spell. "The girl is a source, Geralt," Yennefer said, her voice a rhythmic, melodic command. "The rhythm of your swords is a rhythmic, blunt instrument. She must learn the rhythmic, delicate architecture of the magic, or the rhythm of the power will consume her."
the lessons of the sorceress. The training moved from the garden to the rhythmic, pressurized atmosphere of Yennefer's chambers. Ciri sat before the sorceress, her rhythm a nervous focus. Yennefer taught her the rhythm of the elements. The breath. Breathe with the air, Ciri. Find the invisible currents that move the birds and the clouds. The pulse. She made Ciri hold a crystal. The sound was a high-pitched humming, sin, as the girl's energy flowed into the stone. The control. Magic is not a wild explosion. It is a rhythmic, precise weaving. You are the loom, Ciri. The rhythm of the world is your thread. Ciri's rhythm began to shift. It was no longer the rhythmic, frantic struggle of a child of war, but the rhythmic, budding authority of a mage. The air in the room would often vibrate with a rhythmic, purple light, a rhythmic, visual echo of the power being tamed. The shadow of the hunter. But the rhythm of the piece was being stalked. In the world beyond the white stones of Ilander, a shadow named Rience was moving. The rhythm of the hunt was a dark, rhythmic vibration that Geralt felt in his dreams. Rience was a creature of rhythmic, fire-scarred malice. The rhythm of his magic was a rhythmic, acrid smoke. He sought the girl, the rhythmic golden key to the prophecy. Geralt knew that the rhythm of the temple could no longer hide her. He prepared to leave, to draw the rhythmic, hungry eyes of the hunters away from the sanctuary. The departure in the mist. As the rhythmic silver mists of early summer clung to the temple gardens, Geralt prepared Roach for the road. He stood with Yennefer in the quiet of the dawn. The air smelled of lilac, gooseberries, and the rhythmic fresh scent of the morning dew. "Take care of her, Yen," Geralt whispered, his voice a rhythmic low-frequency rumble. "The rhythm of my life is hers now, Geralt," she replied, her voice a melodic vow. He rode out through the gates. The rhythmic thud of the hooves was a rhythmic, lonely beat that carried him back to the path. He looked back at the white towers where the White Wolf's destiny was being woven into the rhythmic, magical tapestry of the sorceress and the child. Sleep now. The temple is quiet. The herbs are growing in the dark. The lessons are being learned. Let the rhythmic pulse of the lilac and the steady breathing of the stone lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The transition from the herbal silence of Elander to the rhythmic industry of Oxenfurt was a journey into a world made of parchment and stone. As Geralt rode Roach toward the city of scholars, the air lost its floral sweetness, replaced by a rhythmic, heavy scent of river silt, old ink, and the coal smoke of 1,000 chimneys. The sound of the wilderness was overtaken by the rhythmic, distant ringing of academy bells and the rhythmic, steady flow of the Pontar River, its waters a deep, rhythmic amber in the afternoon light. Oxenfurt was a city of rhythmic, intellectual urgency. Its red brick buildings leaned over narrow alleys, and its stone bridges arched over the canals like the rhythmic frozen spines of great beasts. As Geralt crossed the main bridge, the metallic clatter of the road, clack, 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 was a sharp urban percussion. He moved like a rhythmic gray shadow through the crowds of students in their rhythmic billowing robes, his golden eyes scanning the rhythmic flickering movement of the city for the scent of the hunter. The medic's sanctuary. In the heart of the city, Geralt sought a rhythmic grounding anchor, Shani. She was a young medic at the academy, her rhythm a rhythmic bright energy amidst the gray stone. Her small infirmary smelled of rhythmic sharp antiseptics, spirit, vinegar, and dried chamomile. It was a rhythmic, clean sanctuary. "You look like a rhythmic, weary ghost, Geralt," Shawnee said, her voice a rhythmic, cheerful melody that cut through the city's gloom. They sat in the rhythmic, dim light of her study. The only sound was the rhythmic scratching of her quill and the rhythmic bubbling of a glass retort on a small flame. Glub, glub, glub. Geralt felt the rhythmic steady pulse of the city around them, but his focus was on the rhythmic dark vibration of Rience, the mage who hunted Ciri. The rhythm of the hunt had led Geralt here, to the rhythmic academic heart of the North, where secrets were bought with blood and sold for ink. The rhythms of the investigation. Geralt's work in Oxenfurt was a rhythmic, patient reconstruction of a shadow. He met with Sigismund Dijkstra, the head of Redanian intelligence. Dijkstra was a man of massive presence, his voice a rhythmic deep rumble like a tectonic plate shifting. They walked through the secret passages of the city, the air smelling of damp earth and old stone. "The rhythm of the world is changing, Witcher," Dijkstra said, his rhythmic heavy footsteps echoing in the dark. "Rience is but a rhythmic small flame in a much larger rhythmic furnace. Someone is feeding the fire." The investigation was a rhythmic cycle of whispers and gold. He listened to the rhythmic clink of coins in dark taverns and the rhythmic frantic breathing of informants in the shadows of the docks. He felt the vibration in his medallion, a rhythmic agitated thrumming. The mage was near. The rhythm of the fire was drawing close. The battle on the bridges. The confrontation with Rience's assassins happened on a rhythmic misty night near the canals. The air was thick and tasted of river fog. Geralt stood on the stone bridge, his rhythm a rhythmic absolute stillness. Out of the mist the assassins emerged. They moved with a rhythmic professional lethality. The fight was a rhythmic silver blur of steel and magic. The movement, Geralt moved in a rhythmic fluid dance of parries and pirouettes. The sound of his silver sword was a rhythmic singing note, tang, tang, tang. The magic, Rience appeared in a rhythmic violent explosion. The transition from the herbal silence of Ellender to the rhythmic industry of Oxenfurt was a journey into a world made of parchment and stone. As Geralt rode Roach toward the city of scholars, the air lost its floral sweetness, replaced by a rhythmic, heavy scent of river silt, old ink, and the coal smoke of 1,000 chimneys. The sound of the wilderness was overtaken by the rhythmic, distant ringing of academy bells and the rhythmic, steady flow of the Pontar River, its waters a deep, rhythmic amber in the afternoon light. Oxenfurt was a city of rhythmic, intellectual urgency. Its red brick buildings leaned over narrow alleys, and its stone bridges arched over the canals like the rhythmic frozen spines of great beasts. As Geralt crossed the main bridge, the metallic clatter of the road, clack, 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 was a sharp urban percussion. He moved like a rhythmic gray shadow through the crowds of students in their rhythmic billowing robes, his golden eyes scanning the rhythmic flickering movement of the city for the scent of the hunter. The medic's sanctuary. In the heart of the city, Geralt sought a rhythmic grounding anchor, Shawnee. She was a young medic at the academy, her rhythm a rhythmic bright energy amidst the gray stone. Her small infirmary smelled of rhythmic sharp antiseptics, spirit, vinegar, and dried chamomile. It was a rhythmic clean sanctuary. "You look like a rhythmic weary ghost, Geralt," Shawnee said, her voice a rhythmic cheerful melody that cut through the city's gloom. They sat in the rhythmic dim light of her study. The only sound was the rhythmic scratching of her quill and the rhythmic bubbling of a glass retort on a small flame.
glub, glub, glub. Geralt felt the rhythmic steady pulse of the city around them, but his focus was on the rhythmic dark vibration of Rience, the mage who hunted Ciri. The rhythm of the hunt had led Geralt here, to the rhythmic academic heart of the north, where secrets were bought with blood and sold for ink. The rhythms of the investigation. Geralt's work in Oxenfurt was a rhythmic, patient reconstruction of a shadow. He met with Sigismund Dijkstra, the head of Redanian intelligence. Dijkstra was a man of massive presence, his voice a rhythmic deep rumble like a tectonic plate shifting. They walked through the secret passages of the city, the air smelling of damp earth and old stone. "The rhythm of the world is changing, Witcher," Dijkstra said, his rhythmic heavy footsteps echoing in the dark. Rience is but a rhythmic small flame in a much larger rhythmic furnace. Someone is feeding the fire. The investigation was a rhythmic cycle of whispers and gold. He listened to the rhythmic clink of coins in dark taverns and the rhythmic frantic breathing of informants in the shadows of the docks. He felt the vibration in his medallion, a rhythmic agitated thrumming. The mage was near. The rhythm of the fire was drawing close. The battle on the bridges. The confrontation with Rience's assassins happened on a rhythmic misty night near the canals. The air was thick and tasted of river fog. Geralt stood on the stone bridge, his rhythm a rhythmic absolute stillness. Out of the mist the assassins emerged. They moved with a rhythmic professional lethality. The fight was a rhythmic silver blur of steel and magic. The movement, Geralt moved in a rhythmic fluid dance of parries and pirouettes. The sound of his silver sword was a rhythmic singing note, tang, tang, tang. The magic, Rience appeared in a rhythmic violent explosion of fire. The air turned a rhythmic searing amber, smelling of burnt ozone and singed hair. The sound was a rhythmic roaring vroom as the fire magic tore through the mist. The sensation. Geralt used the sign of Quen. A rhythmic shimmering amber shield formed around him, the fire breaking against it with a rhythmic crackling sound. Crack. Rience escaped through a rhythmic shimmering portal, the sound a rhythmic wet pop of displaced air. The silence that followed was a rhythmic heavy weight. Geralt stood on the bridge, the rhythmic lapping of the river the only sound in the dark. The hunt was far from over, but the rhythm of the enemy had been felt. The quiet after the storm. In the rhythmic pale light of the dawn, Geralt returned to Shani's infirmary. The air was cool and smelled of the morning river. He sat by the window, watching the rhythmic movement of the first fishing boats. His body held the rhythmic sharp aches of the battle, but his mind was a rhythmic cold clarity. He knew that Ciri was the rhythmic golden center of this storm. Every rhythmic step he took was a rhythmic protective circle around her. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion, which had settled into a slow, rhythmic pulse. "You're leaving again," Shani said, her rhythm a rhythmic soft sigh in the doorway. "The rhythm of the path is a rhythmic relentless one, Shani," Geralt replied, his voice a rhythmic low-frequency vibration. The departure from the brick. As the rhythmic ringing of the academy bells signaled the start of the day, Geralt led Roach out of Oxenfurt. The rhythmic red brick buildings faded into the rhythmic green meadows of the countryside. He looked back at the city, a rhythmic industrial silhouette against the sky.
The transition from the inland plains to the western coast was a rhythmic transformation of the senses. As Geralt and his companions approached the sea, the air lost its earthy forest scent, replaced by a rhythmic crystalline sharpness, the scent of salt, wet sand, and the deep cold mystery of the great sea. The sound of the wind was no longer a rustle through leaves, but a rhythmic, hollow whistling through the jagged coastal rocks. The Isle of Thaned rose from the water like a rhythmic alabaster dream. It was a place of ancient geological power, dominated by the tower of Aretaza, a spire of white stone that seemed to grow out of the very cliffs. The air around the island was heavy, pressurized by a rhythmic magical static that made the hair on Geralt's arms rise. It was the rhythmic vibration of the ley lines, the invisible rivers of power that converged beneath the island's foundations. The city of Gorsvelen. Before crossing to the island, they lingered in Gorsvelen. The city was a rhythmic, bustling port, smelling of dried fish, tar, and expensive spices from across the sea. The sound of the market was a rhythmic, chaotic percussion, the rhythmic clack-clack of wooden carts on cobblestones, and the rhythmic calling of merchants. Geralt moved through the crowds like a rhythmic gray ghost. He felt the rhythmic steady pulse of his medallion, a constant rhythmic humming. Thaned was the heart of the magical world, and the rhythm of the power here was almost overwhelming. He met with Yennefer in the rhythmic quiet garden of a coastal villa. The air smelled of her rhythmic signature lilac and gooseberries, tempered by the rhythmic fresh scent of the sea spray. "The rhythm of the world is tightening, Geralt," Yennefer said, her voice a rhythmic, melodic warning. "The mages gather on the island not to mend the world, but to carve it into rhythmic, smaller pieces." The crossing to the island. They crossed to Thaned at twilight. The bridge to the island was a rhythmic silver arc of stone that seemed to hum beneath Roach's hooves. The sound of the ocean below was a massive rhythmic thrumming, roar, shh, roar, a sound of the earth's own heartbeat. As they ascended toward the Garstang Palace, the rhythmic white marble walls glowed with a rhythmic ethereal light. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the rhythmic heavy perfume of the sorcerers. Thaned was a place where the ordinary laws of nature were secondary to the rhythmic creative will of the mages. The gardens bloomed with flowers that thrived in the rhythmic magical moonlight, their scent a rhythmic intoxicating sweetness. The banquet of the conclave. The banquet at Aretaza was a rhythmic masterpiece of sensory excess and hidden daggers. The great hall was a sea of flowing silk and shimmering jewels. The air was a rhythmic, complex tapestry of scents, rare wines, roasted peacocks, and the subtle, rhythmic aroma of protective spells. Geralt stood by the wall, his rhythm a rhythmic, silent observation. He watched the sorcerers move in a slow, rhythmic dance of politics. The sight. He saw the rhythmic, flickering energy of Philippa Eilhart, her eyes sharp and rhythmic as a hawk's. The presence. He felt the cold authority of Vilgefortz of Ragaveen, a man whose rhythm was as smooth and unyielding as polished obsidian. The connection. He felt Yennefer's hand in his, a rhythmic warm anchor in the center of the magical storm. The conversation in the hall was a rhythmic low-frequency murmur, a sea of whispers that hid the rhythmic sharp plans of the coming coup. Geralt felt the vibration in his medallion, a rhythmic, agitated thrumming that never ceased. The rhythm of the betrayal was already in motion. The calm before the breaking. After the feast, Geralt and Yennefer found a moment of rhythmic quiet peace in the Loxias Tower. The air was cool and smelled of the night sea. They looked out at the rhythmic silver glint of the waves far below. The silence between them was a rhythmic shared understanding of the cost of their lives. They talked of Ciri, who was sleeping in the rhythmic safe heart of the academy.
The rhythm of our life could be like this, Geralt, Yennefer whispered, her voice a rhythmic, soft vibration. A rhythmic, quiet room by the sea. But even as she spoke, the rhythm of the island was shifting. The air became thinner, more pressurized. The rhythmic humming of the ley lines grew louder, a rhythmic subsonic roaring that signaled the start of the conflict. The breaking of the peace. The coup began in the rhythmic pale light before the dawn. The sound was a rhythmic, violent explosion of stone, the crack shatter of the Loxias gates. The air turned a rhythmic, searing orange, smelling of burnt ozone and singed magic. The silence of the night was replaced by a rhythmic, chaotic chaos. The spells, bolts of rhythmic blue lightning tore through the tapestries, and clouds of rhythmic, poisonous mist filled the corridors. The sound, the rhythmic heavy thud of falling masonry and the rhythmic frantic shouting of the mages. The magic, the island itself seemed to groan, a rhythmic deep protest of the earth as the magical wards were torn apart. Geralt fought to find Ciri. His rhythm was a rhythmic silver blur of steel against the shadows. He moved through the white halls of Thaned, his heart beating a rhythmic, frantic drumbeat of protection. He knew that the rhythm of the ancient world was being shattered on this island, and the rhythm of the child was the only thing that mattered in the ruins. The Tower of the Gull. The rhythm of the battle led him to Tor Lara, the Tower of the Gull. The air there was a rhythmic swirling vortex of raw chaos. Ciri stood at the top of the tower, her rhythm a rhythmic white-hot force of the elder blood. Geralt faced Vilgefortz. The fight was a rhythmic, brutal demonstration of power. Vilgefortz moved with a rhythmic, effortless lethality, his iron staff striking with a rhythmic, bone-shattering thud. Geralt fell, the rhythmic sound of the sea the last thing he heard before the world dissolved into a rhythmic dark silence. Sleep now. The island is broken. The white marble is stained. The tower is falling in the dark. But the child has vanished into the rhythm of the stars. Let the rhythmic pulse of the ocean and the steady breathing of the stone lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The transition from the cool, salt-misted towers of Eretuzza to the Koraf Desert was a rhythmic, violent shock to the soul. When Ciri stepped through the unstable portal of Tor Lara, the rhythm of the world shattered. One moment there was the scent of ozone and the sound of falling stone. The next there was only the rhythmic, oppressive weight of the sun. She tumbled onto a landscape of rhythmic, undulating dunes, a sea of sand that stretched to a horizon of shimmering, rhythmic heat. The air in Korath was a rhythmic, dry furnace. It did not carry the scent of pine or sea, but the rhythmic, metallic smell of sun-baked dust and parched earth. Every rhythmic breath was a struggle, the heat entering the lungs like a rhythmic, invisible flame. The silence was absolute, a rhythmic, ringing quiet that was broken only by the rhythmic whistling of the wind as it sculpted the sand into jagged, shifting ridges. The rhythm of the endless walk. Ciri began to walk. The rhythm of her survival was a rhythmic, slow-motion labor. Her boots sank into the fine, rhythmic grains with a soft, muffled hiss crunch. The senses. The sun was a rhythmic, golden hammer beating down upon her shoulders with a relentless, rhythmic pressure. Her skin felt tight, the rhythm of her sweat evaporating before it could even cool her. The sight. The world was a rhythmic palette of ochre and bone white. The heat haze created rhythmic, deceptive ripples on the horizon, false lakes and shimmering, ghostly cities that vanished as she drew near. The air, the rhythmic thrumming of her own blood in her ears, a steady, frantic beat that was the only music in the void. At night, the rhythm shifted from fire to ice. The desert air became a rhythmic, crystalline chill that smelled of cold stone and starlight. Siri curled into the sand, the rhythmic, soft shifting of the grains her only blanket. She watched the stars, the rhythmic, distant pulses of light that seemed so much closer in the clear, airless dark. The encounter with Ihwara Quox. When the rhythm of her strength was nearly spent, she found a companion. Out of the rhythmic, shimmering haze of the dunes, a unicorn appeared. But it was not the rhythmic, majestic creature of legend. It was a rhythmic, starving ghost, its coat the color of sun-bleached bone, its rhythmic golden horn dulled by the sand. Siri called him Little Horse. Their rhythm became a rhythmic, shared struggle. Imagine the sound of their movement through the desert. It was the rhythmic clicking of the unicorn's hooves on the hard-packed clay and the rhythmic, labored breathing of the dirl. They shared the rhythmic, meager moisture found in the hollows of cactus-like plants, a rhythmic, bitter nectar that tasted of survival. The unicorn moved with a rhythmic, ethereal limp, his presence a rhythmic, silent anchor for Siri's fading mind. In the rhythmic, velvet dark of the desert nights, she would lean against his warm, rhythmic flank, the sound of his heart a rhythmic, steady counterpoint to the howling of the wind. The fire and the choice. The rhythm of the desert reached a terrifying peak when a rhythmic, monstrous creature emerged from the sand, a giant, scorpion-like beast that moved with a rhythmic, clicking lethality. The unicorn was wounded, the rhythmic red blood staining the white sand. To save him, Siri reached for the only rhythm left to her, the rhythm of the fire. In the heart of the desert, she channeled the rhythmic raw power of the sun and the burning earth. The air around her turned a rhythmic, searing orange, smelling of ozone and molten glass. The sound was a rhythmic, terrifying roaring, a psychic explosion of fire magic that incinerated the beast. But the fire magic was a rhythmic, seductive trap. It offered a rhythmic, absolute power that demanded the surrender of her soul. In a rhythmic, final moment of clarity, Siri felt the rhythmic, cold presence of her ancestors, the rhythmic, ancient warning of the elder blood. She renounced the power. She cast the rhythmic, burning energy back into the sand. The sound was a rhythmic, dying hiss. The silence that followed was a rhythmic, heavy exhaustion. She had saved the unicorn, but the rhythm of her magic was forever altered, a rhythmic, dormant ember waiting for a new dawn. As the pale light of another morning touched the dunes, the rhythm of the desert was finally broken. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, not mages or knights, but a band of rhythmic, colorful outcasts, the rats. The sound of their horses was a thunderous drumming, a rhythmic, life-giving noise. They found the girl and the unicorn in the rhythmic, silver shadow of a rock. The transition from the desert to the world of men was a rhythmic, hazy blur. The air began to smell of wood smoke, roasted meat, and the rhythmic, damp scent of the riverlands. Siri watched the unicorn gallop into the rhythmic, shimmering distance, his rhythm a rhythmic, silver streak against the blue sky. The new rhythm of Falca. Siri was no longer the princess of Sintra, nor the student of Kaer Morhen. She became Falca. Her rhythm was now the rhythmic, jagged adrenaline of the rats, a rhythmic cycle of robbery, speed, and cold defiance. She moved with a rhythmic, predatory grace, her emerald eyes hardened by the rhythmic fire of the desert. The air around her smelled of leather, horsehair, and the metallic tang of her short sword. She had found a rhythmic, violent family in the ruins of the world,
but the quiet lessons of Geralt and Yennefer remained like a hidden heartbeat beneath the mask. The silence of the campfire. That night, sitting with the rats by a rhythmic snapping fire, Ciri looked at the moon. The air was cool and smelled of the surrounding scrubland. The rhythmic, melodic laughter of the outcasts was a hollow comfort. She felt the rhythmic pull of the path. She knew that Geralt was searching for her, his rhythm a steady line across the continent. She felt the distant sorrow of Yennefer. The desert was behind her, but the eternal sands of Korath had changed the rhythm of her soul. She was a shifting storm, a child of the elder blood, waiting for the rhythm of her destiny to call her home. Sleep now. The dunes are still. The unicorn is free. The fire is a low, rhythmic glow. Let the pulse of the desert stars and the steady breathing of the wilderness lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The Hansa and the rhythm of the long road. The world Geralt returned to after the breaking of Thanedd was a rhythmic landscape of ash and iron. As he moved south from the healing mists of Brokilon, the continent felt like a rhythmic, weary beast, breathing through the smoke of burning villages. The air was no longer a simple mixture of pine and sky. It was a rhythmic, heavy tapestry of wood smoke, wet wool, and the cold, metallic scent of Nilfgaardian steel. But on this path, the white wolf was no longer a rhythmic, solitary shadow. Around him, a new rhythm was forming, the Hansa, a fellowship born not of blood, but of a rhythmic, shared necessity. Imagine the sound of their movement, the rhythmic, steady clop-clop of their horses, the rhythmic, soft clanking of their gear, and the rhythmic, quiet murmurs of a group that had learned to trust the silence of the woods. The rhythms of the fellowship. The Hansa was a symphony of rhythmic contrasts, each member adding a unique cadence to the Witcher's path. Milva, the archer of the deep woods. She moved with a rhythmic, silent grace, her presence marked only by the rhythmic rustle of her green cloak against the brush. The air around her smelled of pine needles and fletching wax. When she drew her bow, the sound was a rhythmic, musical creak snap of seasoned wood. Emil Regis, the barber surgeon, who smelled of rhythmic, pungent herbs, distilled mandrake, dried sage, and the cool, earthy scent of a tomb. He was a rhythmic, ancient calm, his voice a rhythmic, cultured baritone that seemed to harmonize with the rhythmic rustling of the night. Kr, the knight from the south, moving with a rhythmic, stiff discipline. The air around him held the rhythmic, faint scent of oiled plate and the bitter memory of a winged helm. Angoulême, a rhythmic, sharp-tongued girl of the alleys, her energy a rhythmic, jagged sparks against the Hansa's stoicism. Together, their footsteps created a rhythmic, collective heartbeat on the trail. They moved through the forests of Brugge and Sodden, the rhythmic golden light of autumn filtering through the canopy like rhythmic liquid honey. The campfires of the displaced. Every evening, the rhythm of the march dissolved into the rhythmic domestic ritual of the camp. Imagine the sound, the rhythmic tink-tink of a ladle against a pot, the steady breathing of the horses tethered nearby, and the rhythmic snapping of the fire, pop, crackle, glow. Regis would often brew a rhythmic aromatic tea, the scent of wild herbs filling the air and mingling with the rhythmic sweet smoke of the birch logs. They sat in a rhythmic circle, their shadows dancing against the trunks of the ancient trees. Geralt watched the rhythmic flickering of the flames in his companion's eyes. He felt the rhythmic, steady pulse of his medallion, a constant, rhythmic reminder that the world was still full of magic, both dark and light. They spoke in rhythmic, low voices of the child, Ciri. The rhythm of the search was their shared pulse.
Every rhythmic step they took toward the south was a rhythmic defiant act against the chaos of the war. The battle for the bridge. The rhythm of the journey reached a rhythmic, violent crescendo at the bridge over the Aruga. The Hansa found themselves caught between the rhythmic ironclad armies of the north and the south. The air was a rhythmic, suffocating fog of river mist and smoke. The battle was a rhythmic, percussive chaos. The sound, the rhythmic, heavy thundering of war drums and the rhythmic clash-clang of steel on steel. The sensation, the bridge shivered beneath a rhythmic charge of heavy cavalry. The magic, arrows hissed through the air in a rhythmic rain, their sound a terrifying whisper. Geralt fought with a rhythmic, desperate fury. He was no longer a witcher following a contract. He was a man defending his rhythm, his family. The sound of his sword was a rhythmic singing steel, tang, tang, tang. In the heat of the fray, he was knighted Geralt of Rivia, a rhythmic, ironical title that gave a rhythmic, official name to the man who had always lived on the margins. The quiet of the aftermath. After the battle, the rhythm of the river returned. The rhythmic lapping of the Aruga against the stone pilings was the only sound in the dark. The air smelled of mud, blood, and the rhythmic, clean scent of the receding rain. The Hansa gathered in the silver moonlight. They were battered, their rhythms shaken, but they were still a rhythmic whole unit. Geralt looked at the river, which flowed south toward the empires of the sun. He felt a rhythmic, deep resolve. The rhythm of the war could not stop the rhythm of the Father. "We keep moving," he whispered, his voice a rhythmic, low-frequency rumble that anchored them to the earth. The snows of the south. As they pushed further south, the rhythm of the seasons shifted. The rhythmic golden autumn gave way to the crystalline bite of the first snows. The air turned sharp and smelled of frozen pine and high-altitude ozone. The trail became a rhythmic white ribbon winding through the jagged peaks. The Hansa moved through the snow in a rhythmic single-file march. The sound was a muffled crunch of boots and hooves. The world became a rhythmic monochrome study in gray and white. They sought a rhythmic hidden refuge in the Duchy of Toussaint, a place where the rhythm of the war had not yet reached, a rhythmic fairy tale land of vineyards and knights. The silence of the high pass. That night, camped in a rhythmic high-altitude cave, Geralt watched the stars. The air was ice-cold and rhythmic in its absolute stillness. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion, which vibrated with a rhythmic distant harmony. He thought of Yennefer, whose rhythm was a silver thread in his mind. He thought of Ciri, the golden light at the end of this long, rhythmic road. The Hansa slept around him, their rhythmic, steady breathing, a comforting, rhythmic music in the dark. The path was no longer a lonely line. It was a rhythmic, collective journey through the heart of a dying world, moving towards the rhythmic, inevitable dawn of a new era. Sleep now. The bridge is crossed. The fire is a low, rhythmic glow. The Hansa is resting in the stone. Let the rhythmic pulse of the mountain stars and the steady breathing of the wilderness lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The vineyards of Toussaint and the amber hush. The transition from the war-torn north to the Duchy of Toussaint was a rhythmic sensory miracle. As Geralt's Hansa descended from the jagged snow-blind passes of the mountains, the air underwent a rhythmic transformation. The biting, metallic scent of frozen granite was replaced by a rhythmic, intoxicating warmth. The smell of ripening grapes, warm earth, and the thick, sugary aroma of fermenting juice. It was a rhythmic, golden valley that seemed to exist in a perpetual, rhythmic afternoon. Tucson was a land defined by the rhythm of the vine. Every hill was a rhythmic terraced pattern of green and purple, and the air hummed with the rhythmic industrious buzzing of honeybees. The sound of the wind here was not a howl, but a rhythmic gentle soughing through the olive groves, a sound like the sea whispering to the shore. For the Hansa, weary and scarred, the duchy was a rhythmic velvet sanctuary, a place where the rhythm of the heart could finally slow. They reached Beauclair, the capital, a city of rhythmic fairy tale architecture. The towers were built of pale stone that glowed with a rhythmic pearlescent light, reflecting the rhythm of the sun in the blue waters of the Saint-Retour River. The air in the city smelled of fresh bread, roasted almonds, and the rhythmic, pervasive scent of expensive wines. Geralt was welcomed to the court of Duchess Anna Henrietta. The atmosphere was a rhythmic, courtly performance. Imagine the sound, the rhythmic, melodic tinkling of silver fountains, the rhythmic clack-clack of knight spurs on marble floors, and the rhythmic, poetic flow of the troubadours' songs. The Duchess moved with a rhythmic imperial grace, her voice a rhythmic melodic command that demanded a world of beauty and honor. In this rhythmic, colorful dream, the Hansa found a rhythmic, dangerous comfort. The sight, Dandelion, Jaskier, was in his rhythmic element, his lute a rhythmic silver song in the gardens of the palace. The scent was a rhythmic tapestry of roses, jasmine, and the cool, damp scent of the wine cellars. The sensation, for the first time in years, Geralt felt the rhythmic heavy weight of his swords becoming a rhythmic ceremonial burden rather than a rhythmic survival necessity. The Sorceress of the Summer. The rhythm of the stay was defined by Geralt's encounter with the sorceress Fringilla Vigo. Her rhythm was a rhythmic, mysterious contrast to the north. She did not smell of lilac and gooseberries, but of rhythmic, heavy musk and rare oils from the south. Their relationship was a rhythmic, passionate immersion. Imagine the air in her chambers. It was thick with the rhythmic scent of sandalwood incense and the rhythmic warm glow of 1,000 candles. The sound was a rhythmic whispering of magic and desire. Fringilla wove a rhythmic subtle enchantment around Geralt, her magic a rhythmic silver web that sought to anchor him to the rhythmic golden peace of Toussaint. He stayed in the rhythmic warm embrace of the duchy through the winter months. The rhythm of the hunt for Ciri became a rhythmic distant echo, a dream he had almost forgotten in the rhythmic amber light of the vineyards. He spent his days in the rhythmic quiet work of clearing the monsters from the Duchess's cellars, a rhythmic domestic shadow of his true calling. The Library of Beauclair. While the others indulged in the rhythmic festive life of the court, Regis spent his time in the rhythmic silent libraries of Beauclair. The air was cool and smelled of rhythmic old parchment and vellum. The sound was the rhythmic soft rustle of pages being turned and the rhythmic scratching of a scholar's quill. The rhythm of this place is a rhythmic seductive trap, Geralt, Regis said one evening, his voice a low-frequency rumble in the twilight. The wine is sweet, but the rhythm of the world outside is still a rhythmic bitter one. They sat in a rhythmic sun-dappled courtyard, the sound of the rhythmic distant harps a haunting backdrop. Geralt looked at his hands, the rhythmic white scars standing out against the rhythmic golden tan of the Toussaint sun. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion, a faint reminder that the piece was only a rhythmic temporary veil. The Awakening of the Wolf. The rhythm of the rest was finally broken by a rhythmic accidental discovery. While exploring the rhythmic hidden passages of a nearby ruin, Geralt overheard a rhythmic whispered conversation, a rhythmic magical transmission that mentioned the name of Vilgefortz and the rhythmic dark fortress of Stygia. The transition was instantaneous. The rhythmic golden fog of Toussaint dissolved. The air suddenly felt cold again, carrying the rhythmic metallic scent of the path. The rhythm of the father returned, a rhythmic white-hot fire that burned away the sweet scent of the wine. He gathered the Hansa. The rhythm of their departure was a rhythmic solemn ritual. They left the rhythmic fairy-tale towers of Beauclair behind, their horses' hooves striking the road with a rhythmic purposeful beat. Thud-tap, thud-tap. The air was crisp, smelling of the high mountain passes and the rhythmic cold scent of the coming storm. The road to Stigov. They rode toward the south, toward the rhythmic jagged cliffs where the final rhythmic confrontation awaited. The rhythm of Toussaint remained in their minds as a rhythmic silver dream, a place they might return to if the rhythm of the future allowed it. Geralt felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion growing stronger. The rhythm of the elder blood was calling to him, a rhythmic ancient vibration that bridged the distance between the Witcher and the child. He looked at the horizon, where the rhythmic black silhouette of the mountains stood against a rhythmic stormy sky. The rhythm of the Hansa was a rhythmic unbreakable chain. Milva, Cair, Regis, Angoulême, their rhythms were synchronized now, a rhythmic collective heartbeat moving toward the rhythmic dark heart of the enemy. Sleep now. The vineyards are golden in the dark. The wine is still in the cask. The white wolf is moving back onto the trail. Let the rhythmic pulse of the summer stars and the steady breathing of the wilderness lead you into a deep restorative sleep.
The stone echoes of Stygia and the Hansa's sacrifice. The transition from the amber warmth of Toussaint to the coastline of Ebbing was a rhythmic descent into shadow. As Geralt and his Hansa approached the fortress of Stygia, the air lost its scent of ripening grapes, replaced by a rhythmic, cold salt spray and the metallic, oppressive tang of ancient, dark magic. The castle sat atop a rhythmic, jagged promontory, a black silhouette against a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The sound of the sea below was a rhythmic, relentless thundering, roar, shh, roar, a sound of the abyss breathing against the stone. Stygia was a place of rhythmic architectural malice. Its walls were not built, but seemed to have been hewn from the rhythmic, frozen hate of a different age. As the Hansa moved through the outer fortifications, the rhythm of the air became pressurized, a rhythmic subsonic vibration that made the silver of Geralt's swords hum in their scabbards. The silence of the halls was a rhythmic wait, broken only by the rhythmic heavy thud of their boots on the cold basalt. The rhythms of the breach. The entry into the castle was not a sudden explosion, but a rhythmic, escalating chaos. Geralt felt his medallion vibrating with a rhythmic, violent intensity, a rhythmic warning that the heart of the enemy was near. The senses. The air inside the castle smelled of ozone, old dust, and the rhythmic iron-like scent of fresh blood. The sound. The rhythmic clash-clang of steel on steel began to echo through the vaulted corridors. The sensation. The magic of Vilgefortz hung in the air like a rhythmic invisible web, a rhythmic thick energy that made every movement feel as if it were happening through a rhythmic viscous liquid. The Hansa moved as a single rhythmic organism. They were no longer a group of outcasts, they were a rhythmic collective defiance. But the rhythm of the castle was a rhythmic, hungry trap, demanding a price that could not be paid in gold. The silencing of the rhythms. In the rhythmic, flickering light of the stairwells and the laboratories, the rhythms of the Hansa began to fade. Milva, the first to fall. Her rhythm had always been the rhythmic, silent flight of the arrow. In a rhythmic, final act of archery, she held the corridor alone. The sound of her bowstring, twang, was a rhythmic, silver punctuation in the dark. When she fell, the rhythm of the woods seemed to sigh in a rhythmic, distant grief. Angoulême, the rhythmic, jagged energy of the street girl was silenced in a rhythmic, dark hallway. Her voice, usually a rhythmic, fast-paced chatter, became a rhythmic, soft whisper.
a rhythmic fading spark. Cahir, the knight who had spent his life in the rhythmic cold shadow of the winged helm, met his end in a rhythmic honorable defense of Ciri's path. His rhythm became a rhythmic stone stillness. Geralt felt each loss like a rhythmic physical blow to his chest. The Hansa was being unmade, their individual rhythms merging into a rhythmic eternal silence within the black walls of Stygia. The resurrection of the trio. In the heart of the fortress, the rhythms of the past and future converged. Yennefer, found in the rhythmic dark depths of the dungeons, was a rhythmic fragile ghost of herself. Her scent of lilac and gooseberries was a rhythmic faint trace amidst the smell of cold stone and suffering. Then the rhythm of the elder blood arrived, Ciri. She appeared not as a victim, but as a rhythmic white-hot force of nature. Her movement was a rhythmic silver blur, the sound of her sword, Ziriel, a rhythmic singing steel, tang, tang, tang. The three of them, the Witcher, the Sorceress, and the Child, stood together. Their rhythms, bound by the law of surprise and the Jinn's wish, synchronized in a rhythmic absolute harmony. The air around them vibrated with a rhythmic golden light, a rhythmic collective power that challenged the dark rhythm of Vilgefortz. The final duel with Vilgefortz. The confrontation with Vilgefortz took place in a rhythmic, cavernous hall. The air was pressurized, a rhythmic, roaring vortex of magical energy. Vilgefortz moved with a rhythmic, effortless lethality, his iron staff striking the ground with a rhythmic, subsonic thoom. The fight was a rhythmic, brutal symphony of steel and spell. The sound, the rhythmic clack of the staff against Geralt's blade, and the rhythmic, high-pitched whistling of the spells. The sight, rhythmic white-hot flashes of fire and rhythmic blue pulses of lightning illuminated the hall in a strobe. The finality. Regis, the rhythmic ancient vampire, sacrificed himself in a rhythmic horrifying explosion of fire to provide the singular opening Geralt needed. Geralt struck. The rhythmic silver arc of his blade found its mark. The silence that followed was a rhythmic, absolute wait. Vilgefortz fell, his dark rhythm silenced forever by the rhythmic, cold iron of the Witcher's will. The quiet after the slaughter. The aftermath of Stygia was a rhythmic, heavy exhaustion. The castle began to shiver, its rhythmic dark magic dissolving with the death of its master. Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri walked through the rhythmic ruined halls, their footsteps a rhythmic weary beat. The air outside was fresh and smelled of the sea. The rhythmic thundering of the waves was a rhythmic grounding comfort. They looked at the horizon, where the rhythmic pale light of the dawn was beginning to touch the water. The Hansa was gone. The rhythm of the long road had ended in a rhythmic, bloody stone. But Ciri was free. The rhythm of her destiny was no longer a rhythmic, hunted thing. It was a rhythmic, wide-open path. Geralt felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion, which had settled into a slow, mournful pulse. The departure from the cliff. As they left the promontory of Stygia behind, the rhythmic black towers of the castle seemed to shrink into the rhythmic gray mist of the coast. They rode toward the north, toward the rhythmic, uncertain future. The air was cool and carried the rhythmic sweet scent of the seagrass. Geralt watched the rhythmic movement of Ciri's hair in the wind. He felt a rhythmic, deep peace, a peace bought at a terrible price, but a peace nonetheless. The white wolf and the lion cub were moving together again, their rhythms intertwined in the vast rhythmic silence of the continent. Sleep now. The castle is quiet. The fire is out. The Hansa is resting in the stars. Let the rhythmic pulse of the ocean and the steady breathing of the survivors lead you into a deep, restorative sleep.
The city of Rivia sat upon the banks of its silver lake, a place of red brick and industrial smoke that seemed, for a brief moment, to be the threshold of a long-awaited peace. The war with Nilfgaard had receded like a retreating tide, leaving behind a world that was weary, scarred, but finally silent. Geralt rode through the city gates, the rhythm of Roach's hooves, thud tap, sounding strangely loud in the afternoon heat. The air here did not smell of the mountain pines of Kaer Morhen or the lilac of Yennefer's chambers. It smelled of river silt, cooling iron, and the dry, papery scent of a town trying to remember how to live without fear. Geralt felt the weight of his swords on his back, a rhythmic pressure that had become a part of his very skeleton. He was meeting his friends. He was meeting Yennefer and Ciri. This was to be the end of the path, a rhythmic, quiet retirement from the world of monsters and kings. He found a seat outside a small tavern overlooking the water, watching the rhythmic bobbing of the fishing boats and the slow, golden crawl of the brickwork. The rising fever. But the silence of Rivia was not the silence of peace. It was the pressurized quiet that precedes a storm of a different kind. As the afternoon deepened, the rhythm of the city began to shift. The melodic chatter of the marketplace soured into a rhythmic, low-pitched grumble. Geralt watched the people. He saw the way their eyes moved, rhythmic, nervous glances toward the non-human quarters. A single shout broke the afternoon, a sharp, rhythmic shattering of the calm, then another. The sound began to grow, an escalating roar that was not the rhythmic thunder of an army, but the chaotic, terrifying rhythm of a mob. The air suddenly felt thick, tasting of dust and the acrid, metallic scent of sudden hate. Geralt stood. His medallion gave a sudden, rhythmic leap against his chest. It wasn't magic it was sensing. It was the raw, rhythmic vibration of human malice. He did not want to draw his sword. He had fought dragons, strigas, and sorcerers to find this peace, and now he watched the rhythmic, mindless unfolding of a pogrom. The Street of Shadows. The mob flowed into the streets like a rhythmic, dark tide. The sound was a rhythmic, guttural chanting that drowned out the rhythmic lapping of the lake. Smoke began to rise, the rhythmic orange plumes carrying the scent of burning wool and shattered lives. Geralt moved toward the center of the chaos. He saw the dwarves and elves being pushed into corners, their rhythmic, panicked breathing the only sound they could make. He stepped into the middle of the street, his white hair a rhythmic, ghostly beacon in the smoke. He did not move with the rhythmic grace of a hunter tonight. He moved with the rhythmic, heavy weariness of a man who had seen too much blood. "Enough," he said. His voice was a rhythmic, low-frequency vibration that seemed to momentarily check the mob. But a mob has no ears for the rhythm of reason. A young man, his face a rhythmic mask of fear and fury, lunged forward with a pitchfork. The movement was a rhythmic, clumsy arc. In a world of monsters, Geralt would have parried it in a rhythmic silver heartbeat. But here, amidst the rhythmic, suffocating press of the crowd, the Witcher was just a man. The cold iron. The sound was a rhythmic, sickening thud. Geralt felt the rhythmic, cold bite of the iron as it pierced his chest. He looked down, watching the rhythmic, dark red stain bloom across his leather tunic. The world began to slow. The rhythmic roaring of the mob faded into a rhythmic, distant humming, like the sound of bees in a far-off garden. He fell. The cobbles of Rivia were cold and rhythmic in their hard, unyielding reality. He lay there, his breathing a rhythmic, shallow rasp. He watched the rhythmic movement of the smoke above him, the way it curled and drifted into the blue sky. Then he heard her, Yennefer. She arrived through the crowd like a rhythmic violet storm. Her scent, lilac and gooseberries, cut through the smell of the smoke.
She knelt beside him, her rhythmic, frantic hands glowing with a rhythmic silver magic as she tried to pull his life back from the edge. "Don't go, Geralt," she whispered, her voice a rhythmic, trembling melody. "The rhythm of our life is just beginning." But the magic was a rhythmic, desperate flicker. Yennefer, exhausted by her own efforts, collapsed beside him. Her rhythm merged with his, two hearts beating a rhythmic, fading counterpoint on the cold stones of a city that had forgotten to be kind. The boat in the mist. Ciri appeared out of the rhythmic white fog that began to roll in from the lake. She was a rhythmic silver presence, the child of destiny, standing over the ruins of her family. She did not cry. She moved with a rhythmic, ancient authority. She beckoned to the mist. A boat appeared, drifting in a rhythmic, silent glide across the water. It was not a boat of wood and tar, but a rhythmic, ethereal vessel that seemed to be made of light and shadow. Ciri placed Geralt and Yennefer into the boat. The sound of the water against the hull was a rhythmic, soft lapping. Schlepp, schlepp. She pushed them off, her rhythmic small figure becoming a rhythmic vanishing point on the shore. The boat moved into the center of the lake, where the mist was thickest. The air here was cool and smelled of rhythmic, invisible flowers. The sounds of Rivia, the rhythmic shouting, the crackle of the fires, faded into a rhythmic, absolute silence.
On Mollis Island, the air possesses a rhythmic, ethereal quality, a stillness that does not feel empty, but rather full of every breath ever taken. Here the sun is caught in a rhythmic, eternal amber, painting the apple blossoms in shades of cream and pale gold. Geralt sits by the edge of a stream that flows with a rhythmic, glass-like clarity, his hands resting idly upon his knees. For the first time in a century, there is no rhythmic weight of silver or iron across his back. The scars on his skin remain, but they have become like the rhythmic rings of an old oak, records of seasons past, rather than open wounds. He watches the water move over the smooth, rhythmic stones. In its rhythmic gurgle, shloop, shloop, he hears the echoes of the path. The memory of the road is not a jagged thing here. It is a rhythmic, softening landscape that stretches back into the mist. The echo of the Blue Mountains. His mind drifts back to the rhythmic, biting cold of the north. He remembers the first time he stood on the battlements of Kaer Morhen, the wind a rhythmic, hollow roar against the granite. He can almost smell the sharp, medicinal tang of the trial of the grasses, the rhythmic, agonizing alchemy that changed the very rhythm of his soul. He remembers the rhythmic clashing of wooden swords in the courtyard, the sound thack, thud, thack, echoing off the mountain walls like a rhythmic heartbeat. He sees Vesemir's face, a rhythmic, weathered map of 1,000 winters. The old witcher had once told him that the rhythm of a man's life is measured by the tracks he leaves in the snow. Geralt looks at the soft grass of the island and realizes that here the snow has finally melted. The rhythmic struggle of the witcher's origin has settled into a rhythmic golden peace. The scent of the lilac and the gooseberries. A rhythmic, soft rustle in the grass alerts him to Yennefer's presence. She sits beside him, her rhythmic raven-black hair catching the light. The air around her still carries that rhythmic, haunting scent, lilac and gooseberries, but it is no longer the scent of a storm. It is the rhythmic, floral fragrance of a garden at rest. Together they look into the rhythmic, shimmering distance. They remember the rhythmic chaos of Rinde, the howling of the djinn, and the rhythmic, desperate wish that bound their rhythms together. They remember the rhythmic, salt-crusted towers of Thanedd and the tragic beauty of the night before the coup. The rhythm was always leading us here, wasn't it? Yennefer asks, her voice a rhythmic melodic whisper that blends with the sound of the stream. Geralt nods. He thinks of the rhythmic winding thread of destiny, the law of surprise that had seemed like a rhythmic burden but became his rhythmic salvation. He remembers the rhythmic emerald twilight of Brokilon and the way Ciri's small hand had felt in his, a rhythmic, fragile anchor in a world that was falling apart. The rhythms of the fallen. The mist on the island occasionally takes the rhythmic, fleeting shapes of those they left behind. Geralt sees the rhythmic green silhouette of Milva, her bow forever stilled. He smells the rhythmic, pungent herbs of Regis, the vampire who had found the most rhythmic human of ends. He hears the rhythmic, jangling laughter of Angoulême and the rhythmic, heavy tread of Cair's boots. These are not rhythmic, painful ghosts. They are part of the island's rhythmic, living memory. They are the rhythmic foundation upon which the peace of the survivors was built. Geralt feels a rhythmic, deep gratitude for the Hansa, the fellowship of the lost that had found its rhythm on the long, bloody road to Stygia. Their sacrifice is a rhythmic, quiet music that plays in the rustle of the apple leaves. The child of the elder blood. And then there is Ciri, the rhythmic, golden light of the future. Geralt remembers her training, the rhythmic clack-clack of the wooden sword and the rhythmic frantic running across the windmill. He remembers her rhythmic emerald eyes hardening with the fire of the desert and then softening with the rhythmic ancient wisdom of the Temple of Melitel. He knows she is out there, moving through the rhythmic infinite worlds like a rhythmic silver streak. Her rhythm is the rhythm of the swallow, always in flight, always returning to the sun. He feels the rhythmic thrumming of his heart, a rhythmic subsonic connection to the girl who was more than his destiny. She was his rhythm. The stillness of the evening. As the rhythmic perpetual sun dips slightly lower, the shadows on Mollis Island grow long and rhythmic. The air turns cooler, smelling of rhythmic damp moss and the sweet heavy scent of fallen apples. Geralt and Yennefer walk back towards the small rhythmic cottage nestled among the trees. The sound of their footsteps is a rhythmic soft padding on the earth. There are no rhythmic clanking swords, no hissing potions, and no terrifying screams in the night. There is only the rhythmic steady breathing of the island and the rhythmic quiet companionship of two souls who have finished their work. Geralt looks at the horizon one last time. The continent is a rhythmic distant dream, a place of fires and flags, of monsters and men. But here, in the rhythmic silver heart of the mist, the white wolf has found the only rhythm that truly matters, the rhythm of the end. Sleep now. The path is a memory. The swords are rust. The apples are sweet in the dark. Let the rhythmic pulse of the silver stream and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep. All is quiet. All is well.
The Alchemy of Souls and the Archives of Iron. Beyond the mist of Malice Island, the memory of Kaer Morhen remains etched in the stone of the world like a rhythmic tectonic scar. To understand The Witcher is to understand the rhythm of the laboratory, the place where the human melody was silenced so that a more rhythmic, predatory song could begin. Imagine the lower vaults of the keep. The air there was a rhythmic, suffocating weight, smelling of cold iron, damp saltpeter, and the sharp, stinging aroma of the mutagens. It was a place of rhythmic, flickering shadows, where the only light came from the rhythmic blue glow of the alchemical furnaces. Here, the trial of the grasses was not a single event, but a rhythmic, grueling reconstruction of the self. The rhythms of the crucible.
Geralt remembers the rhythmic bubbling of the great glass retorts. Glub, hiss, glub. The fluids inside were vibrant rhythmic colors, the deep rhythmic violet of nightshade, the rhythmic sickly green of bryony, and the rhythmic shimmering silver of the quicksilver salts. The process was a rhythmic chemical invasion. He remembers the rhythmic cold drip of the decoctions into his veins, a sound like rhythmic icy rain hitting a frozen lake. Drip, drip, drip. Then the rhythm of the pain, a rhythmic white-hot fire that rewrote his nerves. It was as if his body were a rhythmic piece of steel being hammered on an anvil, the rhythm of the mallet, clack, thud, clack, shaping his heart to beat slower, his eyes to see the rhythmic infrared of the dark, and his blood to carry the rhythmic neutralizing toxins of the Witcher's life. When he emerged, the rhythm of his breathing was different. It was a rhythmic deep resonance that seemed to synchronize with the mountain itself. He was no longer a boy of the lowlands. He was a rhythmic, living extension of the stone. The lore of the bestiary. The education of a Witcher was a rhythmic, endless study of the rhythmic dark side of nature. In the rhythmic, drafty library of the keep, Geralt spent years listening to the rhythmic turning of vellum pages. The air smelled of vanilla-scented rot and ancient dust. He studied the rhythmic, erratic heartbeat of the foglet, which moves with the rhythm of the damp mist. He learned the rhythmic, clicking language of the Arrakis, a sound like a rhythmic thousand needles tapping on a rhythmic glass floor. He memorized the rhythmic mourning cry of the banshee, a sound that carried the rhythmic cold frequency of the grave. Knowledge is the rhythmic shield, Vesemir would say, his voice a rhythmic gravelly anchor in the silence of the library. A Witcher does not hunt with his sword alone. He hunts with the rhythmic understanding of the monster's soul. Geralt realized that monsters were not rhythmic accidents. They were the rhythmic, lingering echoes of the conjunction, creatures whose rhythms had been displaced into a world that did not know how to dance with them. His work was to bring a rhythmic silver finality to those rhythms that had become too jagged for the living to endure. The rhythm of the signs. Beyond the blade and the potion lay the rhythmic, silent language of the signs. This was the Witcher's rhythmic shorthand magic, a rhythmic, focused manipulation of the chaos. Imagine the rhythm of the Ard sign. It was a rhythmic, sudden tensing of the spirit, a rhythmic, sharp thrust of the hand that made the air collapse in a rhythmic, booming thoom. It smelled of ozone and shattered stone. Or the rhythm of the Igni sign, a rhythmic snapping of the fingers that called forth a rhythmic orange fan of fire. The sound was a rhythmic, hungry vroom, and the air suddenly tasted of heat and scorched dust. And then the Quen sign, the rhythmic golden dome of protection. When Geralt cast it, he felt a rhythmic subsonic humming around him, a rhythmic honey-colored vibration that turned the rhythmic violent strikes of the enemy into rhythmic harmless echoes. The signs were a rhythmic geometric extension of his will, a way to speak back to the chaotic world in a language it understood. The solitude of the medallion. The most rhythmic companion Geralt ever had was the silver wolf at his chest. The medallion was more than a rhythmic ornament. It was a rhythmic sensory organ. In the absolute silence of the wilderness, the medallion's rhythmic thrumming was the only sound. It vibrated with the rhythm of the earth's hidden veins. When magic was near, it would dance with a rhythmic, frantic energy, a rhythmic silver warning that made his skin crawl.
Geralt would often sit by his campfire, the rhythmic snapping of the wood the only music, and hold the medallion in his palm. He could feel the rhythmic cold weight of it, the rhythmic sharp edges of the wolf's fangs. It was a rhythmic silent bridge between the man he was and the creature he had become. It was the rhythm of his purpose, a steady pulse that never failed him on the path. The memories of the first hunt. He looks at the apple blossoms on Malice Island and remembers his very first rhythmic contract. It wasn't a dragon or a king's daughter. It was a rhythmic, lonely creature in a rhythmic, forgotten well. He remembers the rhythmic dripping of the water in the dark and the rhythmic smell of wet fur. He remembers the rhythmic sudden fear that tasted like rhythmic cold iron in his mouth. But then the training took over. The rhythm of his breath slowed. The rhythm of his sword arm became a rhythmic silver certainty. When he emerged, the silence that followed was his first encounter with the truth of his life. He was a rhythmic, necessary shadow. He was the one who walked into the rhythmic dark places so that others could live in the rhythmic golden light. The quiet of the archives. Now the rhythmic heavy ledgers of Kaer Morhen are closed. The rhythmic alchemical fires are cold. The rhythmic silver medallions are silent. But the rhythm of the Witchers remains in the air of the continent. It is the rhythmic, enduring spirit of those who chose to become the rhythmic thin line between the hearth and the void. Geralt feels a deep peace knowing that the archives of iron have been replaced by the archives of the heart. Sleep now. The keep is a memory in the stone. The silver is resting in the dark. The monsters are only shadows in the trees. Let the rhythmic pulse of the ancient lore and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep. The path has ended, but the story is eternal.
The breath of cities and the rhythm of the streets. To a Witcher, a city is not merely a collection of buildings. It is a rhythmic, living organism, a beast of stone and wood that breathes with 1,000 lungs. While the wilderness is a rhythmic, clean dialogue of wind and earth, the city is a rhythmic, crowded symphony, a dense, pressurized tapestry of sound, scent, and motion. Geralt remembers the way the atmosphere changed as he approached the great gates. The air would lose its rhythmic forest purity, becoming a rhythmic heavy fog of coal smoke, tanned leather, and the pungent rhythmic scent of humanity packed tight behind high walls. He sits on the mossy banks of Malice Island and lets the rhythmic silver memories of those urban labyrinths drift through his mind like smoke from a guttering candle. The rhythms of Novigrad, the eternal fire. Novigrad was the beating heart of the north, a city of red brick and black shadows. Geralt remembers the sound of the great market at midday. It was a rhythmic, deafening percussion, the rhythmic clack-clack of thousands of boots on the uneven cobblestones, the rhythmic metallic ringing from the blacksmith's quarter, and the rhythmic calling of the criers of the eternal fire. The air in Novigrad was a rhythmic, complex weight. It smelled of the brackish water of the canals, the sweet, heavy scent of baking bread, and the rhythmic, sharp aroma of incense burning in silver censers. As a Witcher, Geralt moved through these streets as a rhythmic, invisible current. He felt the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion constantly, a rhythmic, jittery vibration caused by the hidden magic and the ancient, rhythmic curses buried beneath the city's foundations.
At night, Novigrad became a rhythmic velvet trap. The rhythmic flickering of the torches cast long, distorted shadows against the timber-framed houses. The sound was the rhythmic, muffled laughter from the brothels and the rhythmic splashing of the river against the docks. It was a city that never slept, a rhythmic, tireless machine of gold and blood. The lake mist of Vizima. Vizima was a rhythmic, different beast. It sat upon the banks of the lake, and its rhythm was a rhythmic, damp melancholy. Geralt remembers the way the mist would roll in from the water at twilight, a rhythmic white shroud that smelled of reeds, peat, and the cold, rhythmic scent of the dikes. The rhythm of Vizima was the rhythm of the king's law and the rhythmic hidden struggle of the non-humans in the ghettos. The air smelled of wood smoke and the rhythmic sweet rot of the surrounding marshes. In the old manor, the rhythm was one of rhythmic royal decay, the sound of footsteps echoing in vast empty ballrooms and the rhythmic dripping of water in the crypts. Geralt remembers standing on the city walls, watching the rhythmic silver glint of the lake under the moon. The rhythm of Vizima was the rhythm of the Striga's curse, a rhythmic, tragic heartbeat that had brought him into the center of the kingdom's destiny. It was a city of rhythmic, stagnant waters and rhythmic, sudden violence, anchored by the steady tolling of the temple bells. And then there was Beauclair, the rhythmic fairy tale jewel of Toussaint. Walking the streets of Beauclair was a rhythmic sensory immersion in beauty. The city was built of rhythmic volcanic stone that seemed to glow from within, turning the rhythmic evening light into a sea of amber and rose. The air did not smell of smoke or rot. It smelled of rhythmic blooming jasmine, expensive perfumes, and the rhythmic intoxicating aroma of the year's best vintage. The sound of Beauclair was a rhythmic melodic elegance, the rhythmic splashing of the silver fountains in the squares, the rhythmic strumming of lutes from the balconies, and the rhythmic laughter of knights who believed in the eternal nature of honor. Geralt remembers the rhythmic cool shade of the palace gardens, where the air was a rhythmic floral sanctuary. In Beauclair, the rhythm of the Witcher's life was a rhythmic, strange dream. He was not a rhythmic, hunted freak, but a rhythmic, celebrated hero. But even amidst the golden vines, he could hear the rhythmic, subterranean groaning of the ancient elven ruins beneath the city, a rhythmic, dark reminder that every paradise is built upon a forgotten grave. The rhythms of the forgotten alleys. Every city had its rhythmic hidden pulse, the alleys where the sun never reached. Geralt remembers the rhythmic scratching of rats in the refuse and the rhythmic breathing of the displaced sleeping in the doorways. These were the rhythmic, silent rhythms of the world that most chose to ignore. In these shadows, Geralt felt a rhythmic, strange kinship. He was a creature of the margins, and the rhythmic, dark corners of the cities were his natural habitat. He found the quiet beauty in a single flower growing between the cracks of a Novigrad gutter, or the rhythmic silver reflection of the moon in a Vizima puddle. The cities taught him that the rhythm of civilization is a rhythmic, fragile thing, a rhythmic, beautiful mask worn over the rhythmic, primal chaos of the world. The silence of the island. Now the rhythmic urban roar is a rhythmic, distant echo. Geralt sits in the absolute peace of Malice Island. He no longer hears the rhythmic clatter of the markets or the rhythmic tolling of the city bells. He hears only the rhythmic rustle of the apple leaves and the steady breathing of the woman beside him. The cities have become rhythmic, colorful maps in his mind, places he has saved, places he has lost, and places that no longer require the rhythmic silver blade of a witcher. He feels a deep contentment. The rhythm of the stone and the rhythm of the street have been replaced by the rhythm of the rest. Sleep now. The great gates are closed. The city fires are dim. The streets are silent in the mist. Let the rhythmic pulse of the urban memories and the steady breathing of the white wolf lead you into a deep, restorative sleep. The world is still. The path is silent.
The sun on Mollis Island does not set so much as it pauses, hanging in a rhythmic, perpetual state of twilight that turns the world into a sea of liquid lavender and soft gold. Geralt of Rivia stands upon the highest point of the island, a gentle slope where the grass is as thick and soft as velvet. The air here is a rhythmic masterpiece of peace. It carries the scent of ripening apples, the cool moisture of the surrounding mist, and the rhythmic, ancient sweetness of a place untouched by time. He looks out toward the horizon, where the silver mist meets the pale sky. There is no rhythmic thundering of Nilfgaardian drums here. There is no rhythmic screaming of the oppressed, nor the rhythmic, metallic scent of blood on the wind. The Witcher's life, once a rhythmic sequence of violence and survival, has reached its rhythmic, final resolution. The rhythms of the hands. Geralt looks down at his hands. They are the hands of a man who has held the rhythmic, cold weight of destiny for nearly a century. He sees the rhythmic white scars on his knuckles, reminders of the rhythmic silver parries and the rhythmic heavy strikes against the dark. But now these hands hold nothing but the rhythmic soft petals of an apple blossom. The tension that once lived in his muscles, the rhythmic constant readiness of the predator, has finally evaporated. It has been replaced by a rhythmic, profound relaxation that flows through his limbs like warm honey. He feels the rhythmic, steady pulse of his heart, slow, deep, and rhythmic, a heartbeat that no longer races with the adrenaline of the hunt, but beats in perfect synchronization with the rhythmic swaying of the trees. The presence of the sorceress. He hears a rhythmic, light footstep behind him, Yennefer. She moves with a rhythmic, quiet grace that no longer requires the rhythmic, protective armor of her spells. She stands beside him, her rhythmic violet eyes reflecting the silver light of the horizon. "It is quiet, Geralt," she says, her voice a rhythmic, melodic whisper that feels like a physical caress. "Yes," he replies, his voice a rhythmic, low-frequency rumble. The rhythm of the world has finally found its rest. They stand in a shared silence. They think of the rhythmic, long road they traveled, the rhythmic, bitter winters of Kaer Morhen, the rhythmic, floral heat of Toussaint, and the rhythmic, dark finality of Rivia. Those memories are no longer rhythmic burdens. They are rhythmic, beautiful threads in a tapestry that is finally complete. The Djinn's wish, that rhythmic, eternal bond, has finally brought them to the rhythmic, safe shore of the end. The legend of the swallow. Across the silver veil of the worlds, they feel a rhythmic, distant vibration. It is Ciri. She is a bright spark moving through the infinite. They feel her rhythmic, joyous laughter in the wind, and her fierce independence in the pulse of the stars. She is the rhythmic, living legacy of the white wolf, a swallow that flies through the rhythmic, eternal spring of the multiverse. Geralt feels the rhythmic thrumming of his medallion one last time. It does not vibrate with the rhythm of danger or the rhythm of magic. It vibrates with the quiet harmony of a father who knows his child is free. The silver wolf at his chest is now just a rhythmic, cold piece of metal, a rhythmic, silent witness to a destiny fulfilled. The final meditation. Geralt sits upon the grass, entering a rhythmic, final meditation. He does not seek to sharpen his senses or prepare for a battle.
He seeks only to become part of the rhythmic, eternal stillness of the island. The sound, the rhythmic rustle of the leaves. Shh, ish, shh, ish. The sensation, the rhythmic warmth of the fading sun on his face. The breath, his breathing becomes a rhythmic slow-motion cycle. In, out, in, out. He realizes that the Witcher's path was never about the monsters he killed, but about the rhythmic human connections he forged in the dark. It was about the stubborn refusal to let the world turn cold. As he closes his eyes, he sees the rhythmic faces of the Hansa, the rhythmic silver glint of the swords, and the emerald eyes of the girl in the woods. They are all here in the rhythmic golden library of his heart. The mist rolls in from the sea, a rhythmic white blanket that wraps the island in a protective embrace. The scent of lilac and gooseberries mingles with the rhythmic sweet aroma of the apple blossoms. Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, lets the rhythmic final thread of the path slip through his fingers. He is no longer a witcher. He is a rhythmic, peaceful part of the mist, the stone, and the star. The circle has closed. The rhythm of the story has reached its rhythmic, luminous end. Sleep now. The swords are buried in the blossoms. The medallions are silent in the dark. The boat has reached the final shore. Let the rhythmic pulse of the silver horizon and the steady, eternal breathing of the White Wolf lead you into a deep, dreamless, and restorative sleep. All is well. The path is over. The rest is eternal.